I want people to not think, oh, I just need to go be an artist in New York or LA. I wish they want to be someone in San Bernardino and the IE, and I just hope they love it and they commit to it.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to The Empire, where we like to engage with everyone from pastors to actors, rappers to trappers, and everybody in between. And guess what? We have another amazing guest for today. But before we get into it, you guys should know the deal. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Just another update. My name is Antonio the Miles, your host for today. And like I say, we have another great guest for today. So stay tuned. All right. Like I was saying, folks, another great guest for today. And this gentleman is an educator, an artist, a poet, community worker, and so much more. And we're going to find out who this gentleman is. And his name is Juan Delgado. Welcome to the Empire, Juan.
Great to be here with you, Antonio.
Right.
I'm going to enjoy this.
Yeah, it's fun. Thank you for allowing me and to us to come into your home and to film and have this conversation with you.
Thanks for coming driving up all the way to Forest Falls and coming up to my attic studio.
Yeah, it's cool. It's like we'll show you guys some visuals about what's going on in here and stuff like that. But yeah, the drive. I was driving here and I was like, yeah, this is giving me. If you guys haven't seen the movie yet, Leave the World Behind, something like that on Netflix. And so I was like, yeah, Juan Delgado is ready for the apocalypse. He's far enough away from the city, so if everything shuts down, he's set. He doesn't have to worry about nothing.
Well, I think you're not far off. I mean, leave the world behind. I think that's when we first moved up here, I was a little nervous because, you know, my ethnicity, I wasn't sure, coming to mountain communities, if it was going to be all homogenous. And our neighbor was playing Diana Ross. And I said, oh, okay, that's not too bad. But I've been a motorcycle and mountain biker all my life. And I realized about this canyon. And before, I also lived in a canyon in New Mexico for a short time. And I love canyon life. And once you hit the canyon, the creek, the birds, and the quietness, it is like leaving the world behind. And we are kind of self-sufficient because we can be out of power for almost 2 weeks in a snowstorm. And so we have to be very sufficient, and you get to know your neighbors. So we all have generators. We all have, ways to kind of heat things and cook things without kind of, being in touch with the outside world. And so I think we're kind of ready if anything crazy happens. But I think more importantly, you're connected to the seasons. You're connected, and the kind of labor you do up here, it translates into like cutting wood or trimming trees. It's a kind of gets you closer to nature,
Yeah,
and I think there's an aspect of healing, and the silence is also kind of very meditative. So I
definitely.
think so it is getting away from the world. And when I go down to visit my family or my daughters in San Diego, I'm overwhelmed by the lights, the activity, and so it's very nice.
To be away, right?
Yeah,
Is hunting allowed up here?
there is hunting. For longhorn sheep and bear, and there are mountain lions up here, and an assortment of other kinds of things. But there's not too much hunting that goes on. But occasionally, people come up here, and we disturb. We don't like the idea of people hunting bears up here.
Okay.
There's about 250 bears in this canyon that go from Angeles Oaks into Big Bear in here, and they have a pretty good range and a couple mountain lions. So we, every year, maybe accidentally a cub or a couple bears are killed just by negligence or people not being aware of
Mm,
where the wildlife. But the coyotes have also gone. They're crawling back. They're coming back, but there's a lot of wildlife, and so sometimes we watch PBS shows, and they from England, they'll say the wildlife, and they mean birds. And
huh,
here there are things that,
hilarious.
yeah, here there are things that are bigger than you and can break down walls.
I like that. Wow. Ooh, scary. And so you said you ride motorcycles around here, or like you like to ride around here? Is it like a nice scenic route to ride on the motorcycle around here?
I
It
I
seems
started
like it.
about 30 years ago doing the Santa Ana Trail and mountain bikes, and so we were kind of the mountain bikes weren't very popular, and we had the technology wasn't very advanced, but we did the Santa Ana Trail, and so there's a lot of wonderful trails up here, single track and fire trails. Fire trails are kind of man-made or by machinery, and single tracks are usually made by someone with a shovel. And so there's a lot of particular single track and also fire trails. And so there was a lot of riding. And as I got older, I had in my youth rode motorcycles. As I got older, I went to motorcycles. I still do a little bit of mountain biking, but uh, it, the idea of going fast uphill was a kind of a revelation. You're like, wow, I'm used to going downhill fast,
Mm-hmm.
and so I still do that, but it's more um, nowadays. It's I cruise to cruise again.
Okay, I
You know,
love it.
so I ride more to sightsee, more to kind of be just out and where there's vistas and you don't see anybody. Not that I'm an isolationist, but it's so wonderful just to be just in the immensity of nature.
Yeah, just being engulfed in nature, like
Yeah,
we
totally.
have to be a part of it and with it. It's like a
Yeah,
different vibe,
totally.
we're not
And
meant to be indoors. We're not meant to be indoors.
I think so. And I have granddaughters and a grandson, and I think at some point in our lives, kids will grow up where they won't be able to see uh, animals in the wilds. And I think maybe we're one generation away where they won't see coyotes or, deer or longhorn sheep or bears. And so that's kind of that's not lost on me that the idea that things are so fragile that we're maybe one or two generations where a kid will not see a bear. Everything will be in cages or in a zoo.
Hmm.
And so the idea of seeing animals in their own element and learning how to live with them, it's really been humbling and very inspiring.
Yeah, it's like we're overdeveloping, right? And being selfish.
Yeah, that's and more things probably too, but it's our sensibility so human centric that we don't we see everything through our short term objectives and not everybody, of course, a lot of indigenous people
Hmm.
and a lot of other people had kind of wisdom to how to live with nature, but some people are out of tune. I remember my mom used to, when we had chickens, she would kill the chicken and pluck the chicken and eat the chicken. And I wonder how many kids have ever
Seen that?
seen that. And
Yeah.
I don't eat a lot of meat. And part of that is just for my, seeing animals butchered. And,
Okay.
and I just like, wow, I'm not going there. I can't eat that. And I had a pet rooster that we had to cook. And I just thought, I'm not eating that. So,
Mm,
so if you actually have, I wonder what the diets would be if you actually participating in the gathering of your food, right? Like
yeah.
you're growing your vegetables, or if you actually had to eat the thing that you in front of you, the meat. I wonder if your diets would change.
Yeah. Seeing it, how it actually got killed and snapping its neck. Yeah, I think a lot of people, we had the luxury not to deal with it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Fishing
Mm,
might be the easiest thing, but
yeah.
I
Hmm.
think the other things are more graphic.
I agree.
I mean, are you going to eat Bambi or Dumper?
That part. Nemo? Nemo's next. Juan, for people who may not know who you are and what you do, can you please tell all of us who you are and the things that you do?
Who I think I'm in early 60s, and who am I is still kind of always, I think, something I ask myself, um, and in terms of sometimes I'm asking myself who I want to be more than who am I, where and who I want to hang out with, where I want to live,
Mm,
and those kind of associations. Um, and in terms of who am I, and it's also kind of for a person of color, you're, I don't know if you feel this way, Antonio, you're always made aware of your otherness, and through academia or institutions or people, all through elementary school. I was an immigrant, so they were always make. I was always asked that question, "Who am I?" And so it has a social, political, and historical, and sometimes um, um, difficult ways to answer that because sometimes it always comes out of not like right now it's a genuine just try to express to people, but I I'm a I'm an immigrant. I think that's kind of really shaped my identity. I was born in central Mexico in Guadalajara. I came over after my childhood. My family has been on both sides of the border. Um, one of my grandmas was in this area before California was California, but I also have family in central Mexico who are indigenous, Huichol, which is a particular group of indigenous people who are known for like their yarn paintings, and I think that some of the work I is still kind of attribute or a reverence or respect for that. Um, but when we came over, I had a kind of migrant past going back and forth, and I think one of the things that was most constant in my life was education.
Hmm.
I felt that I was very, very lucky that I had good teachers all along that introduced me to things. Because English wasn't my my second language. I still remember the elementary school teacher who read Anne Frank's diary to us during
Okay.
lunchtime, just to calm us down. She would read this diary of this young teenage girl, and it blew me away. The kind of honesty and the things she was talking about and her circumstances. And I thought, wow, what a powerful story that my whole day would kind of be centered on what had happened to her, what was going on. And it wasn't like an action or a video game. It was like in a world of the internal.
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
I started, I think, got interested in storytelling that way. Uh, and so my sister, when I got to high school, I was a little lost. I think I've fallen in too much to the American mainstream of things. Wrestling, girls, cars were kind of
Hmm.
my thing, and so I enjoyed wrestling a lot. And so it was high school, and it was hard to figure out who I was. But sports and those other things kind of maybe delayed those hard questions.
Yes. Hmm.
Um,
Did you ever watch like WWF, WWE?
no, I wasn't kind of pro. I wasn't in pro wrestling like that. I was in collegiate wrestling.
Gotcha, like luchadores.
No, 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 not
Oh,
luchadores.
college wrestling.
High school wrestling, which
Oh,
is kind of Olympic wrestling,
yes.
freestyle, and so it was an interesting time where, like, going back to your question, who am I? I got to really understand my body because making weight, eating properly, conditioning,
Hmm.
and then when you wrestle, you're out there by yourself. There's no one else on the mat, and so and you're always humbled. In wrestling, you're always humbled. There's always someone better than you. There's always someone who you take for granted and is going to put you on your back. And so it was a very humbling. It was a way also to deal with maybe some of the anger and and the things, the bad things that had happened in my youth, and the violence and the drugs and the other kinds of hardships my family went through. It was a way maybe to physically get that out, that anger out,
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
and so it was good for many reasons. And then um, when I was a junior in high school, my sister got a scholarship to Cal State San Bernardino, and she said, "Fill out the paperwork, and I will give you half of my scholarship money for you to apply to go to school." And so
Wow.
I
What year
applied.
is this?
This is in this is like 76, when I'm gonna getting to be a senior in high school, and, this is Eisenhower and Rialto, and, so I said, "Okay, I have nothing to lose." She helped me fill out the paperwork. I get accepted, EOP helped me, and my sister's scholarship, that she got had helped me to stay in school, and it was interesting because if I messed up in school, my sister would say, "Hey, it's my money. You better get your shit together." You know?
Uh-oh.
And so I go, "Oh my gosh, it's not," and so I my sister Flavia, my oldest sister, she really got me into school, and EOP helped me stay in school. Some of the people of color there. Um, I was an English, I was an accounting major, and I was 1 year away from becoming um, an accounting major. My father died, and so I had to drop out of school. And then I went back to school after a couple years. And when I went back to school, my disposition towards education changed from thinking of school as a vocation or a job, but thinking of it as more of a place of investment in me. I saw how fragile life was. I saw how things can be taken away. I saw how a death can completely disorient you. And so when I went
Gotcha.
back to school, and accounting was my major because as a poor kid, I thought at least I'll be near the money, right?
Yeah. Know how to
And
manage it,
right,
handle it. Yeah.
yeah, and so I became an English major by accident because I went to the English department. I said, before I graduate, I want to learn how to write better. This is not my first language. And so this is what you've taken all the classes and you got B's. The only thing you can take is creative writing. And I took creative writing and it was like Antonio, I don't know, you play the piano, and you play music. It was to me like the first time I've been eating fast food all my life and the first time I had a meal that stuck to my ribs.
Got you.
And it was like, oh, this is really,
Soul food.
yeah, it was like, oh, biologically, or I should say, they say sometimes you get certain nutrients out of your body just knows what to pull out of certain foods that are good foods. And it's just like, wow, psychologically, culturally, I was able to draw so much and I thought, oh, I needed this.
Hmm.
So I became an English major. And then from there, I went to graduate school, went to one of the top graduate schools in my area, UC Irvine, got a scholarship to go there. This is the first time I had a big scholarship, and I was like, wow, this is incredible. I'm being paid to go to school. I was like the richest person. I was just married too. And then that changed my life too, because I had some incredible teachers. I had
Hmm.
some of my teachers are world-class critics, a French critic. My other workshop teacher won the Nobel Prize in literature
Okay.
recently, like 2 years ago, and so it was incredible. But so I had some great teachers, and then I started writing, and then I got a teaching job, and then I started, had administrative roles from chair to provost, and publishing books, raising a family, and always kind of respecting the community I came from or the communities I came from and trying to give back. I always thought, when I was a writer and my mom, she was always saying things, you got to remember that behind you is a community.
Hmm.
And did you have to think about how you're contributing to that? And so,
Like you represent a community.
yeah, or you're part of someone. Um,
Like,
you're not the leader of the parade. You're the guy holding the bucket, passing the bucket.
got you. Part of like a lineage. Yeah.
Yeah, and so she made it very, very, very clear to me that I was a stupido if I thought
Hmm.
if I thought that
Tonto.
a tonto if I didn't think about the larger picture of the people who helped me, like my sister Flavia, all the teachers. So I had teachers with such respect and librarians with such respect that think about it, Antonio. I still think about it that you can go into a classroom, you can be exposed to a book that changes your life.
Yeah.
Like you listen to a song or you listen to you see a painting or you read a poem
Yeah.
that changes your life. And I thought, like, and that happened to me. And I thought maybe it was incremental, maybe it was Anne Frank's diary, maybe it was a bunch of other texts that just changed my life or affirmed my life or gave me license to keep going in ways that I thought was against the grain. And so I thought, yeah, man, that's the stuff. That's the most important things. Like
Yeah.
like an idea can change you or expose you to something radically new. And when I went to school,
You know what that reminds me of?
yeah,
The saying that you had right here, which is believe what's in front of you.
yeah,
Going back to like being exposed to the things, the artistic things that are in front of you that can shape you in
yeah.
certain ways.
I think you're totally right. I mean, I think that's a very deep philosophical belief what's happening in front of you. Your practice is so important. The things you do. People talk a great game sometimes, but it's more important about the things you do. So I'm an educator. I'm someone that's always constantly trying to give back to the community. I've been working with the Indigenous community for about 25 years. I'm very far away from my Indigenous roots. For my language, I had to go through the American culture, the Mexican culture, to just get back to my grandfather's culture. I still remember some of the things he did and some of the things he showed us. But my way to pay tribute to the indigenous people or my strand, is to support the local tribes here.
Hmm.
So I've been lucky to work with Ernest Silva, a kind of elder of the Serrano people for about 25 years. and I've been working with the Dorothy Ramon. I also am active in children's programs and literacy programs. I spend most of my professional, academic, and community trying to help families with literacy, education literacy, language literacy, cultural literacy, starting programs that worked with about 50 people, partnerships that ran for about 8 or 9 years, up to 50 families. And I'm presently working with the Garcia Center. So I
Lovely.
haven't done a lot of professional community work with large organizations, though I am connected with one or two.
I think everything counts, I think, you know what I mean? Oh, as they say, Rome wasn't built in a day,
Right.
right? And, I wanted to address a couple things, and the first thing I wanna address, and hopefully I can remember the other thing, is the indigenous conversation, right? I was a friend of mine, someone that I knew in the past, he was indigenous and his grandmother was indigenous, but he didn't speak the language because he said his grandmother was trying to protect him
Mm.
because if they spoke the language, they would be persecuted by even, like, other Mexicans, which have you heard about this type
Oh
of
yeah,
thing?
yeah, yeah.
I thought it was very interesting that they had to hide it because they'd be persecuted by people who didn't speak, like, the native languages of the people who were here first.
Yeah. I
That was
mean,
very interesting.
some of the violence in my past. My dad was institutionalized in mental institutions, and in retrospect, I start thinking about some of the things he went through. He his father was indigenous, and he came over for to the United States for work reasons of my grandfather and my father. My father was born in Whittier, California, in 1925. So in his hometown of Whittier, California, I remember to this day, in like 1968, we went back to his hometown to visit one of our aunts, and there was signs about curfews against blacks and Mexicans.
Mhm.
And my dad, we stayed a little long, and we were leaving, and he got pulled over by a cop and kind of beat up a little bit, roughed up in front of us because we were late. We messed up on the
The curfew.
on the curfew,
Mhm.
and so sometimes people are really down on some Latinos because they don't know their language. But my dad, who was born here, who spoke Spanish, would tell me of, and he was fluent in both languages. He says, I mean, it was a kind of way to, like, not to get beat up, not to physically be beat up. In schools, they would be sent to the principal and smacked around if they spoke Spanish. It was forbidden in most schools when he was in school, and so they would tense up. When we went to school or we talked about things, they had a very different world, and that's transferred to us. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
We can just see it in their faces, and so and then so that goes for the Mexican language, the Spanish side of me,
Mhm.
or the Mexican side of me in the Spanish language. My indigenous grandfather, when he died, in Mexico, they put Indio. They would just say they wouldn't even respect the tribe. They wouldn't even put the tribe name, as if it didn't exist. And so,
They didn't
um,
care.
in Mexico, uh, some of the indigenous, uh, there are over like close to 180 indigenous um, tribes still surviving in Mexico with so many different languages. And most people will talk about the Mayans or the Aztecs, which is super cool,
Yeah,
you know.
that's the big ones.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Nahuatl, but some of the smaller ones that are still around, when you go to the Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City, the um, the bottom floor is devoted to those big cultures, and then the top floor is devoted to all the other indigenous, and nobody goes to the top floor, to the second floor. They
Mhm.
just kind of go to that
What's popular?
was popular, maybe because it's glorified, or the civilizations is much more Eurocentric of a centralized culture. I don't know what it is, um, but yeah. So I think that phenomena of losing your language, or retaining your language, I've experienced it. My family's experienced it in different layers, right? And it's interesting. The indigenous people who are from this area, they spoke 3 or 4 different indigenous language in English and Spanish. So most households were multilingual.
Yeah.
A
Mhm.
and to this day, that we have a society that is monolingual, and is really trying to get you assimilate.
Mhm.
So to me, it's one of the signs of trying to control somebody by controlling the language. We were talking about our piece that it was in Spanglish, and to me, having that Spanglish is a way to kind of accentuate that diversity, that otherness. And when you do Spanglish or you speak a half Indigenous or half Spanish or Spanish and Indigenous, whatever combination, you tend to do that with people you only like.
Okay.
You know, like
Okay.
when you talk with your buddies or something, another sometimes another language comes in,
Yeah.
like home terms, and
Yeah.
you can be familiar. And so to me, that code switching and speaking and going between languages, I only do that, tú sabes, con gente that I like.
Oh, entiendo. Igual, and I like to think that people who are speaking multiple languages are actually smart because it's so hard to speak another language. And so, some people will make fun of people who are trying to speak English, but hey, it's like, have you ever tried to speak their language? Like, you don't
Yeah,
understand how hard it is.
yeah,
And going back to the thing about what my friend told me about how his grandmother was trying to protect him from speaking their indigenous language because like other Mexicans were like persecuting them, like other
yeah,
Mexicans were pursuing indigenous because they weren't speaking Spanish. And I
yeah,
just thought it was the most wildest thing.
yeah.
But I also wanted to talk about when you left school from accounting because your father passed and then you came back. So there's kind of like a before Pops died and after Pops died, one,
Mm.
one, right?
Yeah, my
All
dad was,
right.
yeah.
Right? There's a version before him for you and there's a version of you after him, right?
Uh-huh.
So how long was the period and what did you do when you left school and how long was that period before going and coming back? If you can remember.
Yeah, yeah. No, it was so when my father died, I had to drop out of school, take over the financial responsibilities of the family.
Okay.
And
You're
so
the oldest? Oldest male?
I was the oldest male.
Mhm.
So I had like 4 or 5 jobs. Um, and, you know, and the funeral service took advantage of I was in Mexico studying um, and that summer, and then my father died. So I came back and I had to just take on a bunch of jobs to pay the bills and the force the people that buried my father took advantage of my mom and sisters and said, "You don't want to bury them here. You want to bury them here. You want a better casket. You don't want this casket." And so we ended up being $8,000 or something like that. Back then, it was a lot of money. So
It's a lot of money.
so we just had to figure out how to deal with all that. Um, and I was talking about my father, Juan Delgado. I was upset. I was angry. Um, I was upset, and I had a lot of anger towards my father for multiple reasons because he had left us several times, um, and I was sometimes just we were just raised by my mother in the United States, and so it was just difficult, and so I was mad at my father for putting us in this situation. But I think when after about a year and a half, I went back to school and my whole disposition changed about education. Things just changed. I had a different perspective. And I think one of the things, Antonio, that radically changed is like right now, I'm looking face to face to you.
Yeah.
And I had a relationship with my father that was face to face, meaning son, father, son, father. And I had so many different mixed emotions about like what kind of dad he was, or he didn't meet the expectations, or I had a lot of anger to work through in the things he put us through, um, and sometimes even violence or just different things. And because of his mental condition. But after he died, in that period of working and going back to school, I started learning about my father. After he was dead, I learned about the man who was my father, and my relationship with my father became shoulder to shoulder. And I started thinking about Antonio, like if he was a contemporary like you, and we had to work, what would that relationship be like? You know, and I started thinking about him as a contemporary, and I started losing my anger, and I started focusing more on the kind of hardship that he had to deal with, and that made me much more tolerant and made me open, and that changed my disposition towards education too. I started thinking about being more open about um, other other ways of seeing the history, my own personal history, but also other cultures. And so it really opened up the world for me when I started thinking about not confrontational, face to face, but walking shoulder to shoulder with people, even though I might not agree with them, I started to try to sympathize more with different perspectives. And because of mental illness, I started understanding I didn't have a language for mental illness. We maybe demonized it by silencing it. We
Okay.
didn't talk about it. And so maybe writing, education, learning to write, learning to express myself started giving me a language to deal with issues like mental illness in the family, hardship, the stigma of poverty, violence. It gave me a way to kind of start at least internalizing and visualizing or representing things that I had a hard time dealing with.
Mm,
So education changed radically.
got you. Changed you for the better.
I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
fingers crossed. And
Yeah.
speaking of education, I've heard that you got the name the Fixer as a professor, right? Has that title been common to you as a burden, a blessing, a choice, or was it chosen for you?
I think it was chosen for me. I at I had a visiting professorship at University of Miami. Uh, I was and when I came back to Cal State San Bernardino, the dean reached out to me and said, "Hey, would you be a chair of the comm studies?" Not my department.
Hmm.
It was a different department, and it had gone through some serious problems, personnel issues, and there was a lot of tensions. And I said, "Well, I thought about it." And she said, you know, she asked me just to try it for a year or a semester. And I said, "Okay, I'm willing to try." And when I started talking to people, there was a lot of hurt. There was a
Hmm.
lot of people who were voiceless. There was a lot of tensions. And so I think I just was honest, transparent, and let people just share what they needed to share. And I made sure the trains ran on time. I made sure all the classes were done. I made sure things were equitable. I was very confidential when someone told me something I didn't share with. I didn't try not to cause any more problems. And I just try to be consistent. And maybe coming from my immigrant background, coming from those those kind of situations, education was always a place that should be neutral.
Okay.
A classroom was always a place I felt like a sanctuary.
Yeah, should be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I thought, wow, you know, we need to figure that out because I always said how important like being in the classroom and the only thing you're thinking about is the content of the work and it's based on merit and all these other external things don't come into it. So I just really tried to work with the faculty. They were fantastic. There were a lot of really good people. And you're only good as a chair, it doesn't have a lot of power. You're only as good as the people who are willing to work with you.
Okay.
And then I realized from sports that I wasn't trying to make a model faculty member. I was just asking people, Antonio, what are you good at and how can you contribute?
Okay.
I don't try to, and I'm going to make everybody the shortstop and the number one pitcher.
Hmm.
I'm going to, you can be the best left fielder. You can be the best catcher. What are you
Gotcha.
good at? And once I started asking questions like, how can you meaningfully contribute? In what way do you want to contribute? Instead of saying, here's my ideal, and I want everybody to work like this faculty member over here, I just changed it to say, hey, I just need everybody to contribute and help out in the way they can help out.
Hmm.
And the department was very good. And so I think that kind of pushed me into administration because I did well there and I did well in my home department. And then I've been asked to be in administration. I seldom applied. I've been
Okay.
asked. And so the fixer makes it sound more like an Italian mafia. Uh,
Hey, hey, I came here to fix
yeah.
it. That's my
But
Italian
I
impression.
was much more, I think, trying to have everybody communicate. And I like to put things on the table. And maybe it goes back to not having a language for mental illness. I like to name the things that are the most like, hey, you don't get along with me, fine. As long as you're a hard worker, that's cool. You don't need to be my friend. I like to put things on the table, however difficult they might be, and then start talking about it. And that seemed to be like a method that I've used all along. Just address what we need to address because those issues don't go away.
Yeah.
People would come to me, Antonio's not erasing his board. before I go teach. And I hate it. I hate that he doesn't think about me. And I said, well, have you ever talked to him?
That part.
Have you ever like, hey, just say, hey, Antonio, I appreciate if you erased the board before I went in.
Yeah.
Have you ever said, no? I said, well, why did you try? Or drop him a note. And I thought, wow. And I said, it's that easy. So putting things on the table, being transparent, and being willing to listen and to change, I think goes a long ways.
God,
So that's the fixer, right? Title.
got you. Not self-titled, right? If
Yeah.
it was put upon you, and I've heard so many great things for many years, Juan, even when I was at CSUSB, and I remember even after I graduated, I think I ran into Alex Avila,
Uh,
and he told me a story about what you helped him with.
mm,
I think it was like a really I don't remember the story exactly, but he said that you were a big component in helping him fix the situation that he was going through. Do you remember what the story was
yeah,
with Alex?
there's a couple things, and Tristan too. I remember Tristan. I didn't know Tristan, another person but Alex, um, and part of the situation I should highlight a little bit is, you know, uh, like when I graduated from graduate school, I was the second Latino to get that degree from that university,
Got you from
right?
Miami. No, from
No, from
Irvine.
Irvine. And so,
Mhm.
like, wow. And so I remember calling Gary Soto and say, hey, man, this is really screwed up here. This is happening to me. And cops are always pulling me over. I never felt comfortable in some spots sometimes. And so I always went out of my way. And, we had Dottie Cartwright, who an Afro-American woman. And so the Latino and Afro-American kids, especially English, you could name them. You follow me?
Mhm.
In English, there would be 4 or 5.
Yeah.
And Latino started increasing, but men of color was always super small, and it
Mhm.
is even now, right?
Yeah.
And so, um, and I remember Alex was in my wife's class in linguistics, and she had said, "Hey, this guy's really good." And he needed to graduate. He needed to graduate. I said, "I have the class for you. I have the class for you." And he said, "Oh, I don't know." And I said, "Come on." And I finally got him into meet with me. Had him sign up for the class, and he says that class changed his life because we had a class that was a community-based class that went into elementary schools and taught literacy to the whole family.
Mm.
And he said, "Oh man, this totally has changed my mind." And it started as a volunteer thing. It went into becoming a class, and then went to a program. And we were, nationally recognized in journals, and we did all kinds of national conferences. And so it was just something. But people like himself, Alex, brought such vitality, such community organization,
Mhm.
such passion that it made a big difference. And so I've always had my radar for and that's for any kid, any student. But Alex, um, it's hard not to when you see men of color in academia. It's there's not as many. I think we're in a crisis.
It's a rarity.
Yeah, and
Mhm.
um, so once again, I just remember the teacher paying back all the people who say, "Hey, um, what's going on?" I remember reading an article early on, statistically. Um, this is gonna be, odd, but statistically, faculty members, back then, I don't know if this is true, but the person who gets the most advice and gets the most attention tend to be good-looking white males.
Okay.
And even if they don't need it, people just stop and give them advice.
Got you.
And I said, "Well, hey, I grew up with 3 sisters, and they wouldn't fit into that. And luckily, I had teachers who say, "Hey, no, you might want to try this. Hey, you might want to apply for this." I would never be where I'm at if someone just didn't have the imagination to see something in me because
Yeah.
I didn't have it. And they said my sister had the imagination to see me as a college kid. And so sometimes I would look at my students and say, "Hey, they might be the next president, or they might be the next union leader. They might be the they might replace me. Let me help them." You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And so to me, that was my disposition. Like Tristan Aker, um, I never met Tristan. He was always a night student, and he would always, when I was chair of English, he would always email me and say, "Hey, I can't get this unless I won't graduate." And I for 2 years only knew him through emails, corresponding, giving him courses that he could take at night, and substituting courses, or he wouldn't have gone through school.
Mm.
And so to me, like I'm the guy, the idiot that like I was at World's Market several years ago, and I gave I was wearing this kinesiology shirt at Cal State. She goes, "Oh, I'm thinking of going back to school," but I dropped out, and I said, "Well, here's my card. Call me." And so a month later, this lady, "Yeah, I'm the World Market lady, and I'm having trouble at registration." I said, "Well, meet me, and we'll work it out." A year late, 2 years later, I get a long email say, "Thank you, I got my degree."
Wow.
And it's just like, oh man, I can't tell you. Those are the kinds of things. Last story, when I was teaching when I was teaching part time at Crafton Hills, I was in the class one day, and there was one Afro American kid, and I was saying something about an assignment, and I said, "How many of you guys have library cards?" Nobody had their hands up. So I canceled the class and I just went to the library. I got later in trouble for doing this, but I went to the library and I made everybody fill out a library card and made people get books. And so this Afro American student came up to me named Will, and he said, "Hey, I don't know what book to get." And I said, "Well, what you're interested in?" Is well, Afro American literature. I said, "So well, let me find." And I pulled Black Boy Richard Wright. I said, "This is a classic. I don't know if you're going to like it." And there's The Invisible Man. And I said, "Oh, okay." He took both of them, and I forgot about it, right? And we were in a restaurant 10 years later. I was in a restaurant, and the waitress comes say, and I said, "Can I have my bill?" She goes, "No, that young man over there, that family, that table paid over there." And I get up and I walk over, and I don't recognize him. He says, "You don't recognize me, but you made me get a library card." And and the books I read changed my life. And
Mhm.
I go, I didn't do anything. Do you follow me? More than just get someone a library card.
Yeah.
And so it's something, obviously it was all his work. But if you can just, those little things, that trip up people. So I would not be in a situation, and everybody has sometimes egos like, oh, I made provost, I got these books and I did that. But the thousands of people who did those little gestures that you know,
It's
got
who
me
you
where I
are.
am. Yeah.
And what's crazy is that shout out to you for one, Juan. Um, it reminds me of a saying that Tupac has. He says, "I may not be the one that changes the world, but I will be the person that sparks the mind of someone who does."
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that's what it reminds me of. Also, it reminds me when you talk about reading a book. I remember I used to hate reading until I found out you can read about whatever you wanted to.
Yeah.
I didn't know that was a thing because when you
Yeah.
go to school, they're like, "Hey,
Yeah.
read Tom Sawyer or whatever. Read
Yeah.
about President this." But then when I realized, hey, I don't remember how I came across, but it's like, there's books about anything and whatever you're interested in, you can
Yeah.
read about that.
Yeah.
Once I found that out, I was like, oh, okay, the world's my oyster. I can find out
Yeah.
about anything. And that was basically life changing for me.
And you, as a musician that plays the piano, one of the things about art is that you got content to learn, you got music culture to learn, but you're the subject matter too. You're part of that process of how to interpret it.
Hmm.
You're always thinking, how do I interpret this? Or how do I interpret that? How do I express myself? And so I think to me, that's also going back to being writing is a way that you become the subject matter,
Yeah.
right? And sometimes when you don't see your subject matter represented, or you don't see the person, I didn't have any Latino professors, right? But I had models in other ways.
Hmm.
And so to me, that's kind of a prize that you sometimes directly or indirectly that you willing to take on and say, hey, how many people of color are gonna see you in front of the piano? Do you follow me?
Hmm.
Or I know there's many, but sometimes in some quarters it's like, wow, you can do that or you can do this, and it kind of falls upon you to be humble and generous enough to say, "You can do it too."
Yeah. Someone
You
has to be the first.
Yeah,
Somebody has to be the first.
and you say, "Yeah, there's no problem. You can do it. You can write Spanglish. Hey, you can do it."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Somebody has to be the first. I was talking to an artist, I think Artrell, and he said that he was painting and he had a picture taken about him painting, and he saw this young Afro Afro American boy, black boy, watching him paint in awe, and he can tell that the boy was like, "Wow, like I've never." Usually in Black American imagery, you can only do two things, which is dribble a ball rap or gangbang. That's usually like the imagery
Yeah.
that you usually
Yeah.
see. And so he said that he could see that the boy was so enamored by, oh wow, like
Yeah.
I can do that too. Like someone that
Yeah.
looks like me is doing that, I can do that too. And I realize as I get older that representation really does matter.
Totally does. I mean, I'm an age of photography and a little bit of video, but photography. And one of the things that always struck me, like deep, 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 Antonio, is when I saw pictures of the civil rights movement, like the young gal that goes into University of Arkansas. Why is she the only Afro American woman walking by herself?
Yeah.
And when you see photos of there's the one Afro American kid in that classroom, or they're doing things, they're always just one person. And so when I see that person of color or different orientation, sexual orientation, or the person that I can think can be victimized, you follow me, by
Yeah.
the society,
Hmm.
I go out of my way, say, I'm not going to duplicate that photo of that one person alone. You always see that one kid in the classroom, the Latina girl or the Afro American kid. I remember this one transgender boy, girl, um, in the quad, and always by herself. When I was taking my breaks when I was provost, I go out of my way to just go talk and see how they were doing, what they were doing, um, and it's just something. Maybe it's something odd in me, but it really I think I get it from when I see why are they alone? Why do we let people who are vulnerable alone? Why do we make them break some barrier alone? Do you follow me?
Hmm.
And it just strikes me in the classrooms. So I go out of my way, sometimes maybe too much, but uh, you know, maybe just foolish, but I go out of my way to kind of break that image that I have.
Got you. That's why that's why they're the fixer. You're trying to fix. So I think because and this is just my opinion. Maybe you realize that there's also some connectivity between like um they might be going through some social angst, some depression, some loneliness,
Yeah.
being like you say, you keep on saying an immigrant feeling out of place. So
Mm.
there might be some type of connection. Like, okay, you know what? I can understand going back to the sympathy, empathy, what they might be going through. So let me be. If anybody can do it, I can go up to them at least and maybe lighten up their day, fix their day
Yeah.
for a quiet moment, right? And
Yeah.
we talked about books, right? But books don't exist unless someone writes them,
Yeah.
right? So, as a writer, what's your favorite part about writing?
Uh, my favorite part about writing is it's hard to say one thing, but because it's like saying what's the favorite part of your life, right?
Okay.
It's there's so many different, and you probably have it with music. It gives me it's constantly changing. I've been practicing this for 35 years. My last book won the big awards, and but every time I write, I'm humbled by it, and I feel like I'm starting over again, and I feel like I'm never going to exhaust that art. And there's something gratifying about that, something that you constantly trying to find meaning, create context, create connection, struggle with, like I might write for 6 months about something and it doesn't work out, but I don't get upset about that. And I might have, six or, several books, but I might just say, maybe there's 3 or 4 poems that I'm really happy that kind of worked out. Um, and so I'm just glad that I have an activity and a practice that engages me with the world and allows me to grow, constantly challenges me and gets me to rethink. And it kind of goes back to your question. It always makes me feel that I have to move towards not being comfortable. I have to move towards I don't want to duplicate the same poem over and over in my whole life.
Hmm.
There's probably musicians in music. They have one song and they just variations of it, or they constantly play the same. It's deep down the same song over and over again. And so I don't want to be that kind of person that is stuck in a radio loop, and doing the same thing. And so art, and I see people like live Groundhog Day, you
Got
know,
you.
and art has allowed me to like because it's a process and the product is not as important. And it is important in some sense when you want to be acknowledged and recognized and validated. That's kind of important things. But the process is much more, eh, um, being meditative and aware and conscious and being in the present and also connecting to people. My writing has allowed me to be much more connected to people of to be that are different or ways of reading. Writing and reading is like traveling the world
Mm-hmm.
of ideas.
Definitely.
And so it allows me like, wow, this is Czechian poet from Czechoslovakia, and there's this Russian, and then there's these indigenous writers, and wow, look how they're talking about trees. I never would see a tree that way. Wow, these metaphors are really hard to comprehend because I don't understand the culture.
Mm,
So so it's like being introduced to music that makes you rethink what you think music is, and you're thinking, wow, this is wonderful, and it's so enriching.
gotcha. Getting different perspectives and everything like that,
Yeah,
right?
totally. And willing to change. I think that as you get older, like the Tin Man, you don't want to fossilize. You don't want to
Okay.
you don't want to fossilize into a set of patterns, a set of beliefs. And if you're gonna be able to communicate with people, you have to be willing to be much have that fluidity or a nomadic spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And I think writing allows me that.
I love that.
So it's not just,
Mm,
you know, I don't know, it's a way to uh I don't know, it's kind of like the last thing I say, playgrounds that have pre-described pre-described swings and slides, and
yeah.
you know how to play on that.
Mm-hmm.
That's like a classical score or a particular set of rules of how your imagination should occupy that space and how your body should move through those things.
Mm-hmm.
But when you create playscapes, that might be more like free, like improvisation and jazz.
Gotcha.
And
Mm-hmm.
you got to have both. You can't have structureless play, but um, and so when you have play that's more playscape, where you're using structures and you're using multiple structures, multiple forms, and you're depending on all series of kinds of interesting things
Yeah.
then it's to me writing is kind of like that too. It
Mm-hmm.
allows me to create playscapes and paintings, writing, text. Wow, this is, how much fun is playing and how much meaning, do you get from it too?
Yeah, the joy and the funness of it. And I for some reason when you were talking, it made me think about, the freedom of art and not being stuck in one place. And it reminded me of I spoke to an artist named Debbie Varvey. Shout out to you, Debbie. And she said art is anarchy. And I think she meant in a minute in the way it sounds kind of wild right now, but it's like in a good way, as opposed to being confined in a box.
Mm,
You're being free and kind of doing what you want to do to be your own self,
mm.
right? As opposed to being stuck singing 99 sus red balloons or whatever that is for the rest of your
It,
life.
I would agree with Debbie. I think the other thing I would say is um, there's no freedom without constraints.
I agree.
So you have to have constraints. The more you know about constraints, the more freedom you have to experiment and to represent. So if someone asks you to dance, you can get, the more steps you know, the more maybe you can use your body to represent
Hmm.
your ideas and feelings. So to me, it is chaos. It looks like chaos for a lot of people. Is it Miles Davis that said, spon- um, improvisation is a series of quotations putting in the right context. So you got to have all those quotations above your head, and you got to put them in the right context to make it meaningful. But that means so much. You have to have so many musical chords and musical quotations to be able to pluck one and to put it in the right context at the right staging at the right moment that it's talking to other people.
Yeah.
That's wild. So
Yeah.
that's kind of seems like chaos, but to me it seems like super control. But
Yeah. Controlled chaos.
yeah,
Yeah. There's a big
wild
thing.
civility.
Hey, I love it. There's a big thing that they used to say for like improvisation and stuff like that. And I guess it kind of relates to any type of form of like free forming, which
Yeah,
is your level of knowledge and wisdom, and then how to implement that into your expression.
yeah,
So, for example, they say, you have to practice your scales and blah, 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 blah. So that way you can, and know your knowledge of theory and harmony, blah, blah, blah. So that way you can express your ideas fluidly through the medium. Does that make sense?
totally. Yeah, I
Yeah.
get it. And the other thing I know, and since we're talking about jazz, is that the more the more it's probably true. One of the things I know about jazz that I love is how well they have to listen to their other players, how they have to so be in tune. Because if you're going to be spontaneous, you have to r understand the other instrument, understand how they're interpreting, be able to communicate with that language, and so you have to be really in tune and have to really deeply listen. And I think that's also what's really interesting about poetry is that when you're being creative, you really have to listen to other things, to yourself, to other artists. You really have to listen in the way that jazz performer is listening to the drummist as he takes over the riff with his saxophone.
Yeah.
Because they can't just be monologuing separately, you know?
No, no. It's a form of communication, and it's definitely like on another level. It's kind of like the way they listen and understand is the way like how we're speaking, and I think that kind of transfers to like different art forms. But I know for sure music because like once you hear like a certain note, you're like, okay, that's what that note is. What are they saying? Okay, I understand. And I think the only reason why I say it's a little bit different for different art forms because
Yeah.
when it gets to like abstract art, it's kind of a little bit hard to
If they get the
yeah, understand the
yeah.
communication. And I have my opinion about abstract art, but we won't get into that.
Was it who would they call what's that jazz Coltrane scrambled eggs, you know?
Oh yeah, Coltrane, and shout out to Coltrane. He's definitely influenced the nation. But I want to get back to writing,
Okay.
right? And its effect on you. You know what I'm saying? And you mentioned that you had a lot of, you know, kind of like pent up anger towards your father, senior, right? Was creative writing and writing helped basically let that anger go, evolve as a human being towards that? Did that help at all in the writing? With
Yeah,
the
and
writing?
I don't want to just demonize my father,
And
but
we're not. Yeah,
yeah,
we're not. We're not.
but I mean, I raised those issues, but the thing is, maybe my anger was the anger of a young man, and maybe the lightning rod was my dad because he was the easiest one to pick on. Maybe
Gotcha.
it was maybe other things going on because now in retrospect, when I think about mental illness, how much control it's like being mad at someone who physically can't do something because of their legs or their arms or something. And so some, depression, schizophrenia, they have things that we might not understand their struggle. And so going back to writing, I think writing is not a release of emotions, it's a controlling of emotions. So when you write, if you're trying to duplicate anger, you can't just be angry and write it. You have to learn how to use your craft to suggest anger on the page. So
Okay.
you have to so writing is not a release of emotion, it's a controlling of emotions. So you have to duplicate that emotion through your art. So it's changing it. And so people can say, oh, that character is mad, that character is being funny, that's ironic, this should be taken this way. That's all controlling of emotions. And so the when you have to have a critical distance about how to be ironic, how to control emotions. Yeah, you when you're experience an accident, you're all emotional and it's hard to talk about it. But years later, maybe you can write about it in a more objective way or have the different points of view. So writing is a controlling of emotions in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so going
It's
through
back to
that,
that controlled freedom again, or controlled chaos again.
yeah. And so I've probably been writing about the stigma of being poor all my life
Okay.
as a way to kind of to deal with that internal violence, of knowing hunger, of being, not quite homeless, but drifting from house to house, you know. And so all my life, I've been trying to figure out how to deal with that kind of hardship or sorrow, and so by writing, I've had a distance on it and controlling about those emotions. So it's allowed me to not just carry the emotion here, but to put it out, to look at it, to point at it, to encircle it, to walk it. And that distance, that critical distance, it doesn't make the hurt go away, but it gives me ways to deal with the hurt.
Okay. Interesting. I like to think of, for me personally, I think of art as not only life saving, definitely life saving for sure. But I think it's like everyone needs to. The reason why I call it life saving is because it's expression, right? And a lot of people, going back to mental health, will have mental health issues because they don't have a way to express
Mm.
themselves, right? So I think art is crucial and needed for expression, right? Well, in whatever form you consider art to be. And
I totally agree with you. The idea of expressing yourself is that release is so important, and so just uh, not even psychological, just the idea of physically learning to voice, to draw, to paint, to move, to play. They say like musicians live longer because of their, because they're literally playing. Dancers live longer because of physical activity.
yeah,
Their art, conductors have less heart attacks, but they're constantly moving their arms. And so, of course, art is also physically life-saving.
yeah. I was talking to a gentleman that I knew, also named Antonio, and he's like, "Duele mi knee," He's like, "My knee hurts," and I was like, "Man, bailar, you need to dance."
And by
Like,
that,
I was like, "You need to dance. It's like therapy, Like, he's like, "I can." I was like, just do that. Just do that. You'll be okay. Tu
yeah,
novia, tu esposa, whatever. Like, it's okay. Just
es
do that."
bueno, sí.
And because I remember when I was
Your Spanish is very good, man. Where'd you pick up your Spanish?
um practicamos,
Practicando.
Yeah,
¿Tienes amigos, novia?
primero la tele, el
A la
tele.
televisión,
Sí, sí,
telenovelas,
sí, pero
noticias.
es muy difícil buscando uh, like sitcoms me gusta,
Oh,
because
sí, que
it's
te gustan.
yeah, if I don't even like them in English, like it's muy difícil en español para
Yeah,
mí,
yeah, yeah. They're so bad.
Yeah, and a lot of them are like, cartelo based and stuff like
Yeah,
that, and so yo prefiero like comedia, or like if it's a good like
yeah.
storyline, that I prefer that. But para mí, like, necesito, because my name is not Antonio just for fun, But
Who gave you the name?
my mom, she wanted to name me in honor of her father, to keep the Latino culture in the
Awesome.
right.
Awesome. Yeah, there there's Afro Mexicanos is a big thing. We often, when I did my DNS test, I like, oh, there's Afro. I had like 9%, and the Moors, of course, but I remember reading articles that there were more Afro Americans introduced to Mexico than North America, but they just more, blended into the population. Yeah,
Yeah.
and slavery was outlawed in Mexico before the North America. So
Yeah, 100%. And I guess we'll go on this road, not planned, but we'll go on this road. So a lot of like Mexicanos don't even know that there's like Afro Mexicanos in Mexico, and they might be just like right down the street.
yeah,
And a lot of people that I'll meet, and it's mostly primary Mexicanos, they'll be like, "Antonio,
yeah,
Antonio."
yeah,
They'll look at me like, "Antonio, are you sure?"
yeah,
And some people who might be a little bit educated, they might be like, "Oh, are you Cubano? Are you Dominicano?" That's
yeah,
probably the first they'll go.
yeah,
Um, but the way I like to educate people is like, w- so I consider Indigenous and Latinos two different groups, right?
mm,
So the question is, what is a Latino? And
yeah,
the way, see, I like to make people think. So the way it is that it's an existence of three mixing cultures,
yeah,
which is Europeans, Africanos, and the indigenous cultures.
yeah,
It's those three mixed,
yeah.
and one is forgotten. Can you imagine which one that is?
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree with you. What people don't know about their history is like, and Mexico, because the indigenous side is also the invisible too in some cultures, right? And in some Latin areas, the the underground train didn't only just go to North America; it went to Mexico.
Hmm.
And during the Civil War, there was a big exodus of slaves into Mexico. And so there's this long history of music, culture. It's been there, from the very beginning. From the very beginning of when you think of Mexico as a state, right? They fought in the Revolutionary War. There was Mexican soldaderas that were Afro Mexicanas,
Yeah.
and there's some cool pictures. And so there's actually a cool book about all the Afro uh, guerreras, like woman warriors, And so, yeah, it's totally, totally cool. I have one of my my saints that my mom loved and was the first Afro Latin American saint, Forrest, and from Peru. And so, yeah, it's just part of our culture, and people just don't know.
Yeah, they don't know or they refuse to know or, there's also that stigma, like they don't want to be associated with, like white is right, black is not.
Yeah.
So that's also that history. And then there's the things that people don't want to talk about, which is that there was melanated people here before Columbus, which is there's books like They Came Before Columbus,
Yeah.
stuff like that. The
Yeah.
Olmec heads, which people want to still deny. So it's
It's a long, yeah, it's there,
yeah.
and I'm a mutt, so that's why so sometimes that I have some trouble with people who are so righteous about it. I'm kind of more of a mutt, I have all these percentages of, and so I don't get into the game of like, but I think being a mutt is not, I have all these different strands,
Definitely.
and
But for me, like obviously I'm mixed as well, but when people see me, I'm just like easily categorized. And for the longest time, I was just like, okay, that's what it is until, I looked deeper into my name and then I was like, okay, my Theo's name's Miguel and Hectito. It still didn't ring. Still didn't ring a bell. Didn't ring a bell.
yeah.
Didn't ring a bell.
Do you ever talk to Alex about this? Because Alex is from he speaks fluent Spanish and he's from Honduras.
Yeah, and
His
he's East
parents are from
Coast,
yeah,
and
and he's East Coast, so
so it's
everything.
different. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's more known in the East Coast,
yeah,
because it's more. So the West Coast is more Mexicanos, and the
yeah,
East Coast is more like Central America,
yeah,
South America, and
yeah,
La Caribe. So
yeah,
it's more known and
yeah.
understandable. So yeah, I've talked to Alex about things like this.
The other thing is, I grew up with a lot of music in Mexico, and there would be singers, that they were definitely Afro Mexicanas,
Uh-huh.
and the names, reflected them. But you're like thinking, is this an exception, or they're all, people didn't connect that they were all part of our community. Do you follow me? They
Mm-hmm.
saw it more like an exception, like,
Yeah.
and I was like, wait a minute, no, that's not quite true. And the language, you can always see how, oh, qué blanquita está, oh, qué güerita está,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
always, it's always a shade of lighter that you want to be, the darker, more campesino, more in the fields, indigenous, and then also, so the aesthetic was always to be lighter skin.
Yeah. White
Yeah,
is right.
yeah, right,
Yeah.
right. And so, yeah, they would always, anytime a kid was born, and it's interesting, I'm more fair skinned, my brother,
Uh-huh.
super dark. And he was born in the States and I was born here. But I was always, as a kid, afraid of the migra because they would take him, because they would see him, as a negrito, that we got to take him,
Uh-huh.
and I thought, oh my gosh. And so within my own family, we saw you could look at us and he's super dark, super dark. And I just thought, oh man, sometimes didn't say, oh, that's not your brother. Who the hell are
I
you?
can imagine. Like, his mom with the milkman?
And so, yeah, it was, so we had that as a family, kind of growing up with some of that the kind of visual prejudice.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just part of the culture, unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah,
What's interesting is that I believe that we weren't raised with it, but it was imposed on our culture by the conquistadors, right? That's just
yeah,
my opinion, which people could probably make it factual.
yeah.
But let's get back into writing, right?
Okay.
And do you think that there's a war on art? And what's your opinion on AI art?
Okay, a war on art. I
Yeah.
I think
And art meaning in all forms, writing instead of stuff like that.
I think uh I don't know, the war, see, let me think about that, because I think Um, I want to say yes in multiple ways, right? So when I was growing up, I was really influenced by my friends who were coming when I was in the States in junior high and high school, in particular junior high. I got to meet a lot of El Salvadorian kids, and I was blown away by the guerra in El Salvador and Guatemala and the atrocities they told me about. I just couldn't believe people just being gunned down. And when I started looking into it, I found out that the first targeted group were the artists, the journalists, the writers, the painters, the photographers, the singers. So like people like Antilimani, all the regimes. So there was always a war on artists because they tell the truth.
Hmm.
They make the truth, oh, unspeakable. They're a threat because a painting can, a song like Victor Jara, one song could change a whole country,
Mm-hmm.
can turn on a dictator by the liberation, anthology, protest songs, Nueva Canción, which I grew up with. All these artists, they were just through they were indigenous, Afro, poor, and they were against the regimes. And so I always saw being an artist is kind of like um, the responsibility of saying things that have not been so said before, that there's no history about, and being the true news. Art is about news that stays news.
Mm-hmm.
That unfortunately things, that prejudice, that hatred doesn't change, And so photography, someone photographing something they shouldn't photograph, someone writing about it, dictating it, archiving it, putting it down. So I think one aspect of art is dangerous in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so I saw a lot Latin American artists that in all disciplines be persecuted, be isolated, be tortured, family members. So it was just like something in me always recognized that from the Latin American and some American artists. Um, but so I think there's a war that way, and I think and I think there's a war on art too a different kind of war in classrooms in elementary school, in the war that um, underprivileged and poverty, the rich families can have dance. The rich families can have a jazz ensemble.
Mm-hmm.
The rich families, the affluent families could have theater. They can have opera. They can have leisure time because their parents are not working 12 hours a day. And so there is a war on art that way too, a poverty war where, kids are not exposed. Like for when I was going to school, the idea of getting a trumpet would be impossible.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of someone having music would be impossible. So maybe writing was the cheapest art I can go into, or
Yeah.
painting, because it's a pen, a canvas. But if I was exposed to a piano, if there was pianos around, maybe that would be different. Do you follow me? So I
Mm-hmm.
think there's a war in terms of accessibility and in terms about who has access to art, and also who has access to good education about art.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of art is done badly and is done like it's extra credit, and it's done like, oh, this is for Johnny to get his emotions out, to be expressive. We're not going to grade it. So they don't understand the pedagogical richness of art. They don't understand how art is science, is history, it's technology, it's everything you can imagine, it's culture. And so to me, when you deny art, it's also denying all that, but it's also denying the culture of the people. Like when you start cutting out art in education, it's basically saying, we're not bringing your art into the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
We're not bringing things that you want to hear or things you want to listen to or things you want to see. So there's a war in education of not of seeing art as superficial, as seeing art as entertainment, as seeing art as secondary, as not recognizing the deep philosophical, educational, and the wisdom and the culture and the history connected to art. So, so I think that's another, do you follow me?
Issue.
Another war,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Poverty of not access, and I think sometimes it's intentional. Like, you know what? They can get that at home. They can supplement that, but I think everybody should have an art education. Everybody should have access and it's a kind of literacy, and it's a kind of, people who know music are better at math. That's just,
Mm-hmm.
and people who can read, if it's comic books or whatever, they're going to be better readers at any other thing. They're going to have critical skills.
Mm-hmm.
So, so I think to me, it's really denying things, and I'm really upset. You're like, this is a thing that gets to me. If you taught art, I know we have in school different ways kids will learn, that there's not one pedagogy that addresses all the kids.
Mm-hmm.
And when you work with art, you're giving what you said earlier, a kid a language, a young girl, a young boy, maybe for the first time a language, and and that you can acknowledge and you can talk and they can use to engage and navigate the world.
Hmm.
And that could be kids who have autism, give them a musical instrument, give them a paint brush and canvas and paint. They might be introduced to a way that helps them to navigate this world.
Okay.
And and that's to deny that, to take that away, it is a war in that you had to fight for resources. You had to fight for that kind of good teachers. You have to be vigilant that things are not taken away. But there's a war in that way too. So I can keep going on, but I think there is um, art is always pushing. Uh, I think art is always moving away from the norm.
Got you.
Art is always moving away from the the centralized thing,
Mm.
and good art is always kind of pushing um, another way of thinking about it. So if you're expressing yourself, your sexual orientation, and you're allowed to dance or to be in a performance or performance, sometimes theorists say that your gender is a performance,
Interesting.
that you perform your gender, and that
Okay.
we allow some people to do their performances and we don't allow other people. So it's like,
Okay.
oh, you can have this and that to accentuate your masculinity, but you're going to deny someone else their performance? Like, what a hypocrite, what an asshole,
Got you. It's like
right?
a like identity for anybody, like culture identity or anything.
Right. And so you say, hey,
Yeah.
your whole truck and this and that and flag and the way you dress and your boots, that's a performance, dude.
Yeah.
That's a performance, and you're performing every
Yeah.
day.
And the world's a stage.
And you're staging it, right?
Uh-huh.
But you're saying,
Mm.
"Oh, I can have the stage, but you can't have that performance." And it's like, wow. So to me, their art is at war all the time, and so that's maybe something that I like about art too. That kind of
Yeah.
that risk you take.
Art is anarchy.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. No, I think it's not anarchy. To me, it's art is a clarity. It's clarity. It's like Langston Hughes' poem, "The Trumpet Player," is taking a troubled note and making a golden note. Art is the power of transformation.
Uh-huh.
Trans
Alchemy.
is making something, and so the
Yes.
alchemists are always in trouble
Hmm.
because they can do stuff, right? If you can transform and change things, that's why Plato kicks them out of the Republic, because if they can get the metaphors to get people to think a certain way or their myths or their mythology, they're super dangerous.
Hmm.
They can change people. And so art is at war, and if you're doing something right, you're pissing someone off.
Yeah, that part. That was it. Like, there's this saying they say now. It's like if you have no haters on social media, then you're not doing anything correct.
Yeah.
That's that. That's
So
the
I
thing.
think so. I don't know about the anarchy because that just seems no control. So anarchy means no consciousness. So I'm a little against that. I think there is some form of consciousness and control.
Got you.
Yeah.
I guess I just meant like going against the grain.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Totally.
that's kind of
Yeah.
how I meant it.
Yeah.
And I wanted to get into like your thoughts on AI art, for example, like, and we'll stick to the writing, right? So let's say, what's your thoughts on it for like, so for ChatGPT, what I can do now, I can take a bunch of your poems,
Yeah.
put it into its algorithm, and say, write me a poem about birds in the style of Juan Delgado, and
Yeah.
it'll do that for me.
Right. Yeah. I think this is a really complex topic. I think I've been trying to understand. So I always valued writing the way I just talked about it, that it's a way of representing a sensibility,
Mhm.
representing a conscious. Like like I see you, but maybe when I listen to your music, I'm understanding your sensibility, your conscious even more. It's like another language speaking to me.
Mhm.
And so the AI is mimicking that. Maybe it's also 1,000 consciousness of databases of people's languages that it's, appropriating, taking and putting together. So I think, as much as I hate to say this, that all technology reorients us, changes us, puts us in a topsy-turvy world. All technology,
Okay.
right? And so, like, the mic has changed us.
Yeah.
Like, what was music without amplification before? Could you imagine some people saying, "Hey, what do you think of these goddamn speakers and amplifying music? And what do you think about that? Is that going to change music?" And I said, "Wow, it is, right?" And so I
Mhm.
think AI is a reorientation of everything that we think about in terms of art.
And our
and
approach.
in our approach. And so I'm thinking more. I was just talking to a professor who's is really going to maybe think about quitting because he's just so tired of all the people copying and using AI to write their essays. And he
So it
said,
is affecting the
yeah,
institutions.
yeah. And he said,
Gotcha.
what would you do? And I said, well, I guess I would embrace it and show the students how they can use it wisely and how we can use it in the classroom. And why should I be afraid of this technology? Once again, it goes back to this idea of moving towards something. I think an educator is like a fireman is moving towards the fire
Got you. To put out the fire?
to and confronting danger.
Okay.
Or like
Okay.
you're going to move towards like, oh my gosh, there's nothing going on over there. They're not getting art education at that elementary. I'm running towards there.
Got you.
So I think educators move towards need or
Um,
towards danger
yeah.
because that is dangerous. You're thinking I don't know all about it, but it would. I told them I would feel that I would. It would It would make the classroom a little more democratic because I would say, Antonio, explain to me how AI is working in music. Hey, you tell me how it's working in visual and video. Help me with the writing. Let's all think about how AI is affecting us and let's write about it and think about it. So I would move away towards individual based writing to more collective writing, having more students use AI as a way to collectively write projects together.
Mm,
Right. And so I would move towards a different approach towards writing that is much more public space writing,
okay.
and more communal. And so I think it's all the things that I'm learning is that I think it's an interesting tool. It's a tool. I'm not as scared of it. Um, I'm more like curious about it, and I'm kind of interested to see how it can do a painting, how it can do a poem. And I've seen it, and I've tried it, and it's kind of fun. But there's still something, that's off. But at some point, it can get really good. But what I really worry about is when I take all the things we've ever wrote, Antonio, put it into a program and it gets back to you to try to convince you about how to vote. You know,
Okay.
and so it's using your logic, your language, and then it's coming back at you and saying, Juan, Antonio, hey, you said this before. You should maybe think about this candidate. So I'm worried about how AI can be used by real clever people
To influence.
to influence, to fuck us up, to
Mm-hmm.
change us. So if I'm going to play that chess game, I'm going to learn that program,
Might as well.
right? And so it's to me, it's like, I started this typewriters back there.
I love them.
That's how I started writing books.
Mm-hmm.
And when I went to school, I didn't have a computer. When I taught, the first time I taught at UCI as a graduate student, they all had computers. I didn't have a computer, and I hated that. Like, that computers, they do this and do that. And then people were like, the typewriter changed writing. Computers had changed writing. AI is going to change writing.
Mm-hmm.
So in my generation, all that shit has happened. It's kind of like someone who's raised on those switchboards,
Yeah.
and now they got the Apple phone, and they're going. So
Yeah.
to me, it's not the technology, it's the rate of change, damn it.
Okay.
So do you follow me?
Yeah. How
So
fast
how
change
fast?
technology.
So like my parents didn't see the rate of change that I'm seeing.
Not even.
You know what I mean? Like their grandparents didn't see maybe the world stayed the same for 100, 200, 300 years.
Yeah.
Things didn't change for 500 years. Shit changes in my lifetime that I'm thinking, wow, that's a radical change. We went from, my Jean's grandma who lived to 109, she was born before planes. She was born before phones, right? And so she seemed radical. And I'm thinking, wow, I'm gone from like typewriter to AI,
Yeah.
right? So in my lifetime, 60 years. So it's not the technology, it's the rate of change.
Of the technology.
Right. And so to me, that's what you got to then surround yourself when you get disoriented. So indigenous people have been exposed to this kind of craziness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Other cultures and African cultures, how do you retain what's essential in your culture without letting this other thing steal your soul?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Envelop you basically.
envelop you. So to me, there's a different kind of war, right? And so how do I still? I see people live by their phone, They're always in the phone. They're holding their phone. They're living by their phone. And so to me, that's much more insidious. Do you follow me?
Yeah.
It's like their partner is their phone. And so to me, that there's enough things in our world already that are things that we need to think about, and so AI is just another one of those things. So it's the rate, and how do we intellectually, emotionally. So it's kind of like if you introduce a teenager to a sports car, you're going to be in trouble. You know what I mean? If you don't kind of give, like say, hey, man, like when I got into motorcycles, it was like, I was riding 100 cc's, 200 cc's. A kid now
Okay.
can get a motorcycle that's 1,000
Yeah,
cc's.
1600, whatever.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I'm thinking, it's a rocket.
Crotch rocket.
Yeah, and I'm thinking that is more dangerous and crazier. You don't need that much horsepower.
Mm-hmm.
And so the other side of it is our computer. Maybe we use 10% of our computer capacity,
Mm-hmm.
20%. Maybe your phone you use 20%. Maybe AI people will only use 5%. But there's going to be some evil people who use 100% of it.
Got you. Who know how to use it.
Yeah, and so
Mm-hmm.
I think that's more my worry is that rate of change, disorienting people, make some people close the door on it, make some people shut down, make some people afraid, demonize it. So the rate of change creates all kinds of crap, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? People like, like they go from no planes to jets,
Yeah.
and so they get like overwhelmed by it. So the rate of change and how we deal with that, and then also how we don't lose aspects of our culture and things that we want. I'm not worried, threatened by it. Maybe I'm moving towards art that is all handmade, so it still can't do that.
Yeah.
You know, um, in terms of consciousness, there have been hundreds of years, 100 years, people have been studying consciousness, and they have duplicated some kind of cognitive skills. AI has, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they still don't know how laughter works.
I love it.
They don't know how feelings work.
Got you.
Like the feeling of anger. So, at a deepest level, we still don't understand our consciousness, and so I'm not worried about AI. Do you follow me in
Yeah.
that way?
Yeah.
Because when an AI thing can really be, you know, the complexity of the human mind is like light years still away from the stuff they're talking about.
From being understood.
Yeah,
Got you.
yeah.
For
So,
sure.
yeah,
I love that. I love that. I actually like your take on the AI thing, and I guess the only thing is the fear of it being in the wrong hands and the influence and
yeah.
stuff like that. You
But
know,
that happens with all technology, right? Like,
yeah,
yeah,
I think my whole thing is like I like to think that a sword, nothing is good or bad. It's always whose hand is it in.
mm,
I guess like in a good example would be like Einstein came up with the E equals MC squared, and that turned later into the atom bomb,
right,
right?
right, yeah.
But I wanted to get into, you mentioned Langston Hughes, right,
Hmm.
earlier. So who are some of writers and poets that helped influence your writing or that inspired your writing?
You know, inspiration. Certainly, there's a lot of writers, but and I'll in a roundabout way, I'll get to the writers. Uh, but I think just name dropping, like before I was talking about, I went to school with Jacques Derrida, Louise Gluck, all these incredible, like super and accomplished writers, and dozens more. And I had a lot of mentors like Larry Kramer, um, incredible writers and teachers. And so I think one of the first things is the immediacy of the writers and the mentors I had.
Mm-hmm.
Like um, so like if you're a basketball player, you say Michael Jackson. Michael Johnson is my Magic is my I aspire to be him. But along the way, there was been probably a lot of coaches and a lot of players that help you to get closer. Do you follow me
Mm-hmm.
to that model?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there was a lot of people in my life that were beginning artists, established artists, maybe not as known, but certainly meaningful in my life. But I think there was a couple things that influenced me that are important, and I think like environment is one of them. Like I grew up in an age. We've been talking about technology. I grew up in an age, and you might like this for the references you've been making to rap. I grew up in the age of cassette players.
Mm-hmm.
right? And so uh, when I was in high school, we started getting cassettes, and that changed the world for me, that technology, because a lot of records that I couldn't get a hold of, we had the what do you call it,
Yeah.
the bootleg tapes, and so people would say, "Hey, I went to the library and I checked out the Langston Hughes recordings, and we can't afford the record. We don't even know where to get the record, but here's a bootleg copy." Now, I have all those tapes behind me
Hmm.
of bootleg copies of poets reading Shakespeare, Langston Hughes, Wallace Stevens, and so there was no way I would be I wouldn't been affected by listening to these poems for the first time. The idea of listening to someone speak in an Irish with an Irish background accent, or a Welsh background accent. So I heard the human voice besides just reading it. And so the bootleg tapes gave me access to a world of recordings, of music, of artists that I never would have had,
Okay.
and it was so cheap. We couldn't afford it. You had access to copying, so became a network of, so this happens to rap, right? Rap artists and sampling and all these things,
Hmm.
right? And so the how important is that technology, right? Of showing your demo, hearing your song, and it undermines the kind of capitalist system of distribution of work,
Yeah.
right? So you can actually give me a tape of your playing music next to what did a tape cost? Like $1, you know?
Yeah.
Maybe less,
Yeah.
and then or you can reuse it, and so wow, I get it. And then we'd be listening to all these poets and from all these different countries for people who had records. So that was a big influence, that technology of opening up access to things that we normally wouldn't have. The other thing is I grew up, you can see around me, I love books. Actually, I've been cutting back, but um,
You have a book addiction?
yeah, no, no. I read all these books, but I grew up in the used bookstore world, where you
Uh-huh.
would go to a bookstore and you would get a box of books and go through it, and you would pay 50 cents for a classic or a book. So I would
Good
never
stuff
have
right there.
I would never have private library if it wasn't if I had such access to books, and I knew what kind of books, or I would spend 10 minutes reading the book and say, yeah, it's worth $1, or it's worth 50 cents.
Hmm.
Um, so I would never be in the position I'm in if I didn't have access. Because when you go to school, I don't know how it is for music, but you go to school, you get a canon. You get like, here's the 10 novels you need to know. Here's the 10 writers you need to know. Here's, the standard things you need to know in the canon. And it's an anthology sometimes. So you get like not the best of the Renaissance or the Romantics. I never got my favorite poets of the Romantics, John Clare. Um, and so some anthologies they excluded things. So I was able to supplement my whole education for dollars, for quarters,
Hmm.
and
It's
so
awesome.
that's such an influence,
I love it.
because think of all the books that I thousands of books or hundreds of books that I've gotten, maybe paying less than $200 or $300, because or exchanging, or I would read one and go back to the used bookstore
Yeah.
and get another one, right?
Hmm.
So, and so records, um, tapes, and books, they created a landscape, an environment where poor kid, could have a private library.
Hmm.
I don't know how many records you have, or tapes, or CDs. Do you follow me?
Hmm.
But it changes the way you play music when you're surrounded by that. When you say, what did so and so, the Anglo Welsh poet say about this, R.S. Thomas. Let me go look at his book. I got it. Oh, I remember reading this. Let me go back to that. So this is before the internet,
Oh yeah.
right? Before I had Google, and not everything's on Google that I like to read. And so that was a great, great influence. And then I had, I think one influence was, this has a musical reference and Latin American reference. Viola Parra, as a woman from Chile who was a kind of musicologist, who went around all the different indigenous and poor housing in Chile and listening to their songs and recording their songs.
Mm.
It would be like going to the South. the Deep South and going to people's porches and listening. Like, what songs do you play to celebrate a birthday?
Hmm.
What are your favorite songs? And so she got all these incredible songs, and she started writing poetry, writing her own songs, started doing paintings, and so she was this artist.
Wow.
She was this artist that changed my life in the sense that she she had multiple languages. She wasn't worried about how they classified her. So she had a kind of a kind of academic background in terms of gathering important music that's been neglected, transforming it into her music, doing painting and yarn work, and then also being a performer and also writing poetry. And I go, like, hey, that's what a poet is, like an
Yeah.
artist is,
Yeah.
and so. So those kind of people, and her brother's an incredible poet that I love too. Uh, and so it was a family that saw art, music. There was this integral, going back to your thing about art and how important. Maybe art keeps families together.
Okay.
Maybe,
Relationships.
yeah, relationships together. And so this family was all of them are artists and scientists, but art is the thing that is the one thing that's always bringing them together as a focal point. And I'm thinking, wow, maybe that, I think art can do that. Art keeps me closer to my parents, my mom, my dad, which thus keeps me closer to my siblings.
Hmm.
So I can totally understand that. So anyway, there was a lot of artists that spoke out to me that way, that were connected, that were doing social political things, that were trying to change the world in small ways by introducing ideas, by showing that I think Langston Hughes was one of those artists that we are the stuff of art. Langston Hughes always
Hmm.
tells me that Afro American culture is the stuff of art.
Hmm.
It's the highest art. And that for a kid, an immigrant, green card kid, second language speaker, and you see him writing in black dialect, or you see him, you know, characters, uh, Alberta Johnson, who's super, this kind of, I don't know how to describe her. She's one of my favorite characters. This kind of uneducated black woman who's the smartest person in the world,
Hmm.
bring down everybody, bring them to, her in a level that they need to be brought down to. And I'm going, wow, he's saying that his culture is a stuff of art. Oh man, that's kind of like a revelation. Do you follow me?
Hmm.
And you're
Mind
thinking,
blowing.
yeah, it's like, hey, we're the stuff of art. You're going around, we're the stuff of art,
Hmm.
you know? And it blew me away, so people like that, and there's so many to name, but every time I had a roadblock or difficult situation, there's certain artists that I go back to, William Blake, James Joyce, and there are a few books. Instead of artists, I'd like to say they're like books that are living books. Like some people, like their Bible is their living book. They have a problem, they go
Okay.
to their Bible.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Okay.
It's a book that they carry here.
Hmm.
It's like solves their problems, or
Yeah.
it's a living testament. They live by it.
Yeah.
It's not something they just put in a shelf and go back to. And I think there are poems and there are books and there are stories that are living texts in me. And they're
Hmm.
by a whole variety of artists, and that when I need something, they're there for me.
Wow.
And
That,
they're like got my back. And like, hey, it's not too bad. Um,
that reminds me of I had a conversation with her name is Romaine Washington, also a poet, and she
yeah, I
said
know
that
her.
she goes to I can't, I think her name's Aubrey something, another poet. She goes to a poem by I think her name's Aubrey or Audrey, and she
Lord.
yeah, yeah, she said she goes to one of her poems and it just fills her fills her spirit every time she just when she needs something she just goes to it and it just puts her in that mood, and it just reminds me
Yeah,
of that.
yeah. I do believe in object uh, ontology. It's a fancy stuff, but basically that objects can change us. Like
Okay.
things can change us, like an heirloom or a cross.
Okay.
Like objects can change our lives. Like affect the way
That's
we do things.
symbols.
Yeah, but an
Okay.
object there could be a sacred rock.
Yeah.
There could be maybe
A necklace.
a necklace, or how would you be if you couldn't touch a piano?
I live that life.
You know what I mean? The physicality, right?
Hmm.
The object, right? Um, and so I think that a poem and a book or something, it's sometimes just in the vicinity of it, or like, like, like when you see like a landmark in a graffiti or a Persian, a mural of the Virgin, the Guadalupe, you're just going, you know, you
Got
know,
you.
and or you get
I
into a
see sign.
yeah,
Yeah.
or a sign or a chair, or like I have my altar for my family,
Uh-huh. Yeah. Hmm.
and I'm like they're with me, and so those objects, they're part of my life. They change my life. They enrich my life. And so a poem is like that. Art is like that. There could be, and you might not even know it, man. There might be something like a mural or a thing or a something that, or a song that once you get it, it's like it's like now fresh air. It's like in your lungs. And so when you get it, you go, oh, yeah, there it is. I needed that. So I think there's been a lot of influences like that, everyday influences, the aesthetic. Like you said, I'm glad just to have a breath.
Yeah.
So there's
100%.
beautifulness in the light and the trees, and so to me, it's not just objects that are in a museum that influences, but it could be some other things that are like I could be looking at a rock and I go, wow, that is just
Boom.
the most beautiful rock I've seen.
Got you. Or a gum stain on the floor.
Gum stains, yeah,
Got
absolutely.
you. Um, One, if you can you recite a poem for us?
I don't like to perform much, but we had one of our teachers. I'll recite a Langston Hughes poem. I wish this is a poem. It's called "Poem of Urgency." I wish rent was heaven sent.
Uh-huh. Rent?
Rent. I wish rent was heaven sent.
Awesome.
Yeah,
The end?
that's it.
I
That's it.
love it.
Yeah. So, but performance is an interesting thing, and it's kind of like asking for some people the director to play the actor that's playing the movie that he directed. You say, would you go to a director sometimes and say, "Hey, you wrote this, you directed this, or or you're the screenwriter, you wrote this. Do you mind playing that acting scene?" Do you follow me?
Hmm.
And so sometimes we do associate a lot with the person who writes the script or writes the poem as the performance. Do you follow me? And I'm not. There's something in me that I don't like performance as much. I do like writing. Do you follow me?
Yeah.
But I don't like the performance. I don't know if maybe it's my so many priests, so many people in front of something, someone speaking, and there's an aspect of me in music you have to perform it. But there are people who compose music who don't like. Do you follow me?
Yeah.
Who
People
who
who write
who
for other
write it,
people. Hmm.
and they're not the best performers of it. They
Hmm.
have other people who perform it.
Yeah.
And so to me, I write a lot in characters, and I write with many different characters. And so sometimes I write in the voice of my mom, sometimes I write in the voice of my father, and it
Okay.
feels a little weird sometimes to try to play them, you know.
Gotcha.
But I don't mind. I mean, what I mean by them is like their sensibility. They would think this way, and so sometimes I feel ambivalent, or sometimes I hate to say this. Sometimes I think we live in such a performance atmosphere. Sometimes I think, I don't know if you buy this, that the performance sometimes to me becomes more important than the writing of it, or takes away from me what I like most about writing.
Okay.
Because sometimes I have to be conscious of, I don't want to turn someone's um, ideas and feelings into just for the sake of a performance. I feel like that's like almost sometimes an abuse of someone's past, or this is the way my dad was. Do you follow me? This is my
Mm.
mom. And I think I
Yeah.
can never capture my mom in 100 poems and 1,000 poems.
Yeah.
You know?
It's so interesting that you mentioned, I didn't cut you off, did I?
No.
That you mentioned about the performance thing. Um, because going back to shout out to you, Romaine Washington, she said that because I asked her about is there a difference between performing and writing on page, and she said there's been some times where she was impressed by a poet's performance, but when she sat down and read the writing, she was like disillusioned, like the performance disillusioned the actual writing behind it. And so that's what it kind of reminded me. But the reason why I asked about if you would recite it, because in my mind, I may read your writings a certain way, but only you can fully express how it's going to sound. Like like even like anyone's writing, like I can read anyone's writing or anyone's music, and I can interpret it my way. But I always like to go to the source and hear how the source would
Sure.
express it.
Yeah. No, I'll read you something, but I just want to push back a little bit because we
He
do
wants
get,
to push back a little bit, folks.
yeah, we do get caught up into the authority of the artist as the authority of the text. Do you follow me?
Hmm.
And so to me, that's something I think about and question a little bit about, um, because once it's written, the text, it's almost outside of me now. It's like someone can interpret it the way they want. They might see things that I don't see. And so my agenda is not necessarily the only agenda, reading agenda people should have. I will hope that I write poems that have a sliver of me in it, and that there might be other things that people can then find that it communicates to them. And so I don't try to write about things that are different. I try to confirm what people already know,
Hmm.
and so people know love, people know hate. So I try to confirm what they might know already in a context that is familiar to me, that is from maybe my experience, but it's hopefully something that people can relate to their world or their context. In terms of what you just said, I think uh, so. When I read something, I might know exactly where the censuras break, where the invisible commas might be. I know how to play the alliteration or accidents, and so I can get caught into that. Do you follow me? So sometimes, like when you read or you play musical score, you might get caught up into the structuralism or the form or some aspect. And I see sometimes that in a performance. Sometimes a performance is just a human voice, and you could have three simple words that are so moving because of the melody, the rhythm, the way it's delivered, that the text is not that important. Do you follow me? Um, and so to me, I'm almost curious. I would like to write poems that people could read. Do you follow me?
Hmm.
And sometimes I have the fear that if the performance outweighs the text, then the text depends too much on that. And that in like, do you know movies and music that is all special effects?
Yeah, Michael
Like,
Bay or something like
yeah,
Transformers or something like
yeah,
that.
or like
Yeah.
video games, it's just total special effects. And so performance can get into special effects and can lead writers into really accentuating special effects. Do you follow me?
Yeah.
And so, and like your friend was saying, it could get so that the text, what the theme and the ideas or the emotion becomes secondary to the performance, right? So, which is a kind of special effects. It could depend on movement, voice out, projection,
Yeah.
special effects. So, and that's all, that's acting. That's super cool. And that's a whole other art. That's a whole other art that maybe I don't understand and a little more leery, but I'm much more comfortable and and just letting my characters speak for themselves
Got
or
you.
letting someone else speak. But I'll read you a poem
Yeah.
when I get a chance. I got to find a book here.
Yeah. We're surrounded by books.
Yeah, no,
Share with
I
us.
have some back here.
Grab one. Go ahead. Grab one. Share with us,
Okay, can
please.
I put this down?
Yeah. I'll hold it
Okay.
for you.
All right. Let's see.
We want to be shared, right, folks? Definitely. This is one in a lifetime type of thing,
Okay, let me see.
right?
I'll maybe pick.
Yeah. Just give us one. You
Yeah,
don't have
just
to.
give you one.
Yeah. Just give
Okay.
us one.
All right. Let's see.
Yeah. You know.
Let's see.
Don't overthink it. You're good.
Yeah, I don't know what to do.
That one that had the writing on it right there. The one
This
that.
one? This one? Okay. This one. Okay. I'll read this one.
Here you go.
You ready? Okay. I get it. All right.
What's
Let's
the
see.
title of the poem?
It's called Slant. And I just reading it because you saw the writing in it. And it's I thought an idea when I was writing this poem, I thought, what if there was a moment in our history that all the undocumented labor in the United States would just sit down one day,
Hmm.
would just sit down. not say anything, just sit down on the floor of where they were working in the sewing place or in a restaurant or in your garden
Okay. Like a protest.
without saying anything.
Okay.
What would happen? And how many people would then be struck by the number of people just sitting down and in a mall. And so this poem, so slant is going off an idea from Emily Dickinson. She says, tell the truth, but tell it with a slant, right? And so
Mhm.
tell the truth, but tell it with a kind of artistic or an interesting. So I thought that would be interesting as a way to think about protests. Is to what if this ever happened where someone in our society, or think of anything like battered women. What if all battered women would sit down one day, just right where they were
Mhm.
in the and wherever they were doing, and we would be shocked. Do you follow me? Or
Yeah.
what if uh, kids who had not eaten the whole day sat down in front of you, and then you immediately created a kind of tension by that sit-in. And it goes maybe to Gandhi and Martin Luther King.
Mhm.
And Martin Luther King said, the sit-ins were about creating tension. Like, why is that person sitting in front of that store?
Yeah.
Why are they in that cafe sitting down? And they're not doing anything. Do you follow me?
Mhm.
So it goes back to maybe some of those thinkers. So tell the truth, tell it with a slant. So the poem's slant. The hissing of irons rings, the hissing of the hissing of onion rings call him, but he sat on the wet tile instead. The orders whirled around the stainless steel wheel, and a waitress across the kitchen yelled, "What's he doing on the floor like that?" Across town, a family of pickers also sat, while a school bus of field hands drove by. They too were finished with crop picking. When the factory workers elected to stop, they didn't know what to do with their hands. Some put them in their pockets, others propped at their heads, a few stared at their palms, which made the foreman nervous, prompting him to run into his office and hide behind a cabinet. Something spread across the city like a prayer, but the aisles in the grocery store were still full. The neighborhood lawn seemed well groomed, though weeds and crabgrass began to thrive. Some people imagined more trash on the sidewalks. Yet there was no earthquake or great fire of change. Only the smallest tilting of the day could be sensed. The price of fruit stayed the same for now. The children of immigrants stayed in their rooms. The nurse reported no nosebleeds. The bakeries flipped their signs to Alberto. Tortillas, pale and sweaty, were not delivered. No one would be checking tickets at the theater. The new off ramp would stay closed a little longer. On that first day, nothing really big happened that one could say was out of the ordinary.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing,
Yeah,
Juan. Thanks for sharing.
yeah.
Thank you for sharing. And
So you can see the ripple of like it starts out, and the foreman gets nervous because they're not working,
yeah,
and
everyone's getting kind of a panic, kind of starting to
yeah, no
build.
kids came to school,
Yeah.
and that's a labor issue. So a lot of kids would have nosebleeds. So I have friends who were campesinos, and so they would always go to the nurse. And so the nurse at school is reporting less kids coming with ailments is because they're all sitting at home,
Yeah.
and so all these things, and nobody notices that their lawns are all starting to slightly change, but
And look worse. I
yeah.
love that. I
Yeah,
love
but
that.
I imagine that to me would be like, could you imagine you would go to a golf court and these rich guys are playing golf, and all the people who do the lawn are sitting there?
Yeah, just on the floor. You might
Yeah,
get a couple of kids that might
yeah,
not be there.
yeah.
I wanted to talk about your partner in crime,
Tom,
Thomas
yeah,
McGovern, and you guys worked on, your award-winning book, Vital Signs, correct? And
yeah,
you also recently had a show together at the RAM
yeah,
Museum, the
yeah.
Riverside Art
And we
Museum,
had one at the Cheech, yeah.
and the Cheech. And so I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but he came to you, correct?
Uh-huh.
How did you know that he would be a good fit as a partner?
I think the number one thing in a partnership, and I could tell I think conversation is an art.
Okay.
And I love your podcast, and I think it's displaying how important conversation is is an art form. You learn, you can grow. Conversation is a way to acquire knowledge,
Exactly.
right? Um, and
Thank you, by the way.
yeah, and so I immediately started talking to him, and I thought, wow, this guy is on the same page as me. We philosophically, culturally, totally understand. He was documenting AIDS, the AIDS epidemic in families. I was doing migrant work. We said, hey, let's get together for doing a talk on the swap meet. And so I love the swap meet. And started talking about the swap meet, and and so we
Make sure
started
this is
we
right
started
on you. There
yeah,
you go.
we started working on those things, and we had a lot of ideas in common. And so I think that was the first sign that we were going to be a good partnerships is our ability to communicate.
Okay. And you said you worked on the swap meet project and a bunch of projects you guys have worked on.
Yeah.
How do you guys decide on which projects to collab on, and then how do we execute those projects?
Oh, okay, that's a good one. Part of people have asked us to do some things based on some of the. We had some art openings in Los Angeles, and I think one had a citrus theme, and the curator during the cheat show said, "Hey, we need some things on the citrus labor. Can you guys do something?" We said, "Yeah, we can put something together." We had done something in a national museum, a national park, the Citrus Park in Riverside, which is national park. It was a working grove and their historical museum on 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 labor and the citrus industry, the packing houses and men working in the fields. And so we started saying, hey, we can do that. And so we get together and then we say, let's see the space. How much space do we have? And once we see the space, and Tom will tell you that I'm the idea guy, I'll say, here's 10 ideas. Like there's one over there that we're working on, that I was working on. And he said, well, we can do that. He'll have some ideas, but then we'll just figure out how to maximize the space and the kinds of things. We'll do things together. We'll do things independently of each other, but it's always the theme that's coming together of labor and citrus or signage, which we did a whole thing on
Mhm.
the signage and murals in San Bernardino. So we kind of sit down and think about these kind of things, but um, we bring our different arts and then start bringing them together in conversation.
Awesome. Cool. And I know some things are not easy, but I know it's always worth getting the project done.
Yeah.
And I wanted to congratulate you on, winning your award for Vital Signs. I also want to congratulate you for, I think you won for was it the Cal Arts? Or
Cal Arts is it?
yeah,
Yeah.
I
I've
want to
won a lot
congratulate
of.
you for that.
I've won several literary awards, which is super. The American Contemporary American Poetry Prize and the American Book Award for poetry. But it's super cool to be recognized for my art. So yeah, it was the California Arts Established Artist Award. So that was super cool to get that for the artwork. Um, and so yeah, it's just been exciting. And as I get older, I feel more like a kid, and it's interesting. I've been some of these prizes have come with a substantial amount of money, and I keep telling my friends and my wife and my kids, I go, when I was starting out at 35 and 40, the money would have been like life changing. Now it's kind of like, oh, it's okay, it's great, but I wish I had gotten this money when we had three kids and we were barely making the rent or paying the house,
Yeah.
mortgage, but it's all cool, and I'm happy at this point to be kind of starting new journeys and doing new things.
Yeah. I like things like that make me think that God's a comedian. It's
Yeah,
like, God, this would have been awesome back
yeah, yeah,
then,
yeah,
God.
right.
Like, hey,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
what's but I
yeah,
also do believe that everything happens for a reason and our outlook in life really matters. And I'm a big component on energy and like what you put out comes in type of thing.
yeah,
But I also wanted to ask you, since you've been involved with community work such as the SCIPP SIP and also Native Voices,
yeah,
and you've also done some philanthropy work, like with helping with Tristan's Only Empire Award show
right,
and
yeah.
many other things. Why are things like that important to you?
Uh, you know, um, like Tristan, I remember when I was starting events that a couple $100 was life changing, right?
Mhm.
That someone say, "Hey, Antonio, I believe in what you're doing. I believe in your podcast. I believe in this. Here it is. This is how I can, and I want to be there. Not only monetarily. I want to be physically there. And so, and for the people who sometimes it's like $50 or like they gave us, resources, material. It was just like you felt good. You felt like someone hugged you,
Mm-hmm.
right? And someone embraced you. And for whatever the gesture, it's kind of like you're both hungry and someone breaks the bread and says, "Here, you can have half of my bread."
Yeah.
And you're like, "Wow, okay." We and so to me that's part of that kind of I feel that I, receive more when I am actually giving my labor and my expertise as a manager or, the administration experience I have to organizations. So I feel um, lucky and blessed to be in the position that I can do that, right? Um, and so, like Tristan, the Native Voices, um, my grandfather's language, Huichol, I never practiced it. We heard it. I have some examples of his writing, but in my lifetime, um, I was born 1960. They say anthropologists and linguists say there was like 11,000 languages, native languages, and now we're down to 5 or 6. So
Okay.
within in my lifetime, we've seen that genocide of lost languages.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine if you lost your ability to say love or father, mother, those languages were dying. And so when I first met Ernest Silva, he was teaching in a building in Banning his language, on a Tuesday or something, and it was me and a couple linguists and some other, a couple indigenous people. I said, man, I'm going to support this person. If you're going to every month come out and try to imagine the burden of trying to keep your language alive,
Mm-hmm.
and you're one, a few people are practicing your language.
Yeah.
Could you imagine, Antonio, you're saying, I'm the last guy playing musical notes, jazz,
Yeah.
and I'm going to go out every Sunday, open, and just so someone can hear this thing called jazz, right? Or this thing called Serrano language. And I go, wow, like I'm down to help that person. You follow
Yeah.
me?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm ready to roll on that paddle boat. And though the waves are big
Yeah.
and it's
It's okay.
and so
Two's better than one.
so I started with another person, Pat Merklin, the Native Voices, which celebrates the human voice, bird singing, poetry, chanting, everything you can do, and you think of the art of the that comes out of our vocal cords,
Mm-hmm.
and so storytelling. So, and it's a way to think about what I've lost that I can't retain. I feel like it'll be hard to get back, but it helped my local community. Most people, they know French, they know German, they can know how to say words in different languages. I would say, I would almost say, guarantee you that few people can say hello or say something in the indigenous language of where they lived.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
so to me, I'm not trying to be righteous about anything, but just saying, hey, it's kind of the invisibility of this, of the landscape, of the people, of the history. So I'm down just to help them in this way. It's been wonderful. We've done like 8 or 9 Native voices, and we get a lot of community buy-in. And and I first started teaching the workshops to the indigenous youth, and now they're teaching those workshops, and that's the way it should be.
I love it. It's
So
spreading.
yeah, and so
Mm-hmm.
and we're doing uh, a language conference in this area based on one of the Native Voices panels where we were showing what Indigenous people were doing to retain their language in a couple tribes and on the Cahuilla and Serrano, and a couple reservations, and we had the actual people who were doing the thing, and what they were doing, and people loved it so much. We're going to be doing in April, um, uh, inquiry the different reservations, different cultural groups, and what they're doing to keep the language going on. I get excited about that.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's
it's kind of
good.
like just like I'm on that paddle boat saying, "Hey, we can do it, man. We can keep
Mm-hmm.
paddling here." And so and Skip, that came out of a program where some high school, elementary school teachers came over and say, "We don't know how to teach poetry," and it ended up being an incredible program of education literacy, with 2 incredible, Larry Light and William Brashear, out of Salinas Elementary School, and we to this day, I still run into families and children that we worked with that are in college, and I still run into the teachers and the skip tutors that are doing all kinds of incredible things. Alex is one of them,
Yeah.
doing all kinds of incredible things, and and it kind of fell apart after a couple years, after like 8 years, and like every rock band is one player from breaking up. And so
Okay.
things come and go, and I'm okay with that. But the influence that that thing is still having on the people like Tristan and all these other people and Alex and dozens of other people, it just makes me happy. It makes me feel good.
Yeah.
And that you play a small part in this community engagement and activism. So it's just you're as good as the group you run with, man. I just want to always tell
True.
people,
Yeah.
if you want to be a good person, who are you hanging out with, man?
True.
And
Yeah.
if you're a lazy person, who are you hanging out with, man?
Yeah. That
Y-
reminds me of a chapter in my book called Circle of Seven Fools. So if you look around and you see seven fools, most likely you're the eighth. You
yeah,
know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah, totally. I mean, I remember reading once Earth Day, which is now a national, international phenomena, was started by three Yale guys or gals. They just said, "Hey, we should have an Earth Day," and it's like these three people started creating this Earth Day concept, day celebrating the Earth, and it was like three or four people, and I'm thinking, man, some people hit gold.
Yeah.
And so it literally the world could be changed by four or five people, 10 people. I do believe that.
Definitely.
Yeah,
Facebook, right? That's how Facebook happened, right?
yeah.
Um, Juan, what's something that you're willing to share that is what most people, maybe even close people, don't know about you? We know about you we know about you riding motorcycles now, but what's something that most people, even close people, probably don't know about you?
Oh, if the more they know me, the more they know that I'm a kid, that
Okay.
I'm reverting to childhood, that children have it all right, and we have it all wrong, and they take such great joy. When a kid sees you, they light up, they're happy, they're visually, they're they live in the moment. And so I think if you get to know me, I'm a kid by heart, and that they're like, if you believe in angels, they're kids. The
Okay.
closest we come to angels is the kids that come into this world, and we have angels. They were angels, and we got to do everything we can to keep them that way.
Gotcha.
And so,
Let's say some badass kids and demons. We'll
yeah.
spank them.
Yeah, no. I mean, I think, they have so much ability, so much imagination, so much curiosity, and so like we got to just keep that going. That's what I mean. That really there's so much full of potential, and I never get down when I'm around kids, man.
Mm,
They're just so that's my I think the biggest joy. And so to me, yeah, just that kid sensibility. And the thing that maybe how this translates to everything is when I was an administrator and a teacher, um, when I was an administrator, I would always imagine a student next to me in anything I did.
okay.
Like if you were my Antonio, the image, I'm in a big meeting, and I would always say, "What's the best thing for the student?" Or what would the student think about this? What would they be voicing right now? And so to me, I always had that the student, the adolescent, the kid, what would they be thinking right now? Like when I take my grandkids, I don't take them for a walk. I say, "You guys take me for a walk. What do you guys want to see?" And so they take me in ways that I would never. They could stay at one plant for 30 minutes. I would have gone by.
Uh-huh.
So that sensibility, that presence is kind of like a living testament to me of how to conduct myself. And so I'm constantly always thinking, what would what would a child think like now, right? What would it? Sometimes it gets me into trouble. I was in the bathroom, and this guy was yelling at the kid, like reprimanding him for something. He's like, "You stupid kid, what are you doing?" And I said, "Hey, man, you don't need to talk to the kid like that. You don't like think about that, man. You're like 4 feet taller than the person. You
Mhm.
outweigh them by, you know, 200 pounds, and you're
Yeah.
in their face, wagging your finger, and you're yelling at them." I go, dude, imagine someone 40 feet tall, grabbing you and yelling at you. And I go, dude, and he goes, what's none of your business? I go, yeah, it is my business. I'm in the bathroom with you, you know? And so it gets me into defile me. So I get caught up into the like, hey, what would the poor kid think? You can't take, you can only take this group of people, you know, like, so I always have that mentality. It seems to be something that, that I think some people who hang out with me, they get that sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. You know, Juan, I want to thank you for being on the Empire. What are some current projects that you're working on?
I'm, I have a little small book of, on citrus workers coming out. Then I need to kind of refine. It's a letterpress publisher. It's going to produce a book. Letterpress means like the old-fashioned putting, lead figures and printing it by hand.
Wow.
It's going to be like an art book in that sense. And I'm working on some other paintings and concrete poetry. Trying to get together another book. And I'm just constantly reading and writing and thinking of a bunch of projects and trying to. And Tom has some ideas that about doing some I won't share them because we're still at the beginning stages. So we've had a lot of good interest. Like the show we did at the Cheech was we were part of a show, and it was rated the top 10 in LA. Art shows to go check out. So we're we're getting a lot of buzz from things we've done, and we're hoping just to keep doing some other things that that keep us engaged and also have fun.
That's super cool. So they want you to do another project with Tom in LA. Is that what they're saying? Or they just
Oh,
congratulate?
we just have some other projects that we're starting to do some research. We do a lot of research on projects people don't know, but we'll do
Okay.
like an hour, almost 2 years of research on the labor in citrus. We went to packing houses. We interviewed the women working in packing houses. We did a lot of interviews of men working in the groves, picking lemons and oranges. So we'll do a lot of research, and we have a site that we're going to be doing some research on labor. Um, and so we do a lot of research, talk to people, do, kind of history, um, and also just interviewing the people who are actually doing the labor and start getting photos, interviews, writing things, and start piecing it together. And then kind of a vision of what the work will represent starts developing.
Okay. You know, I was looking at this naked woman right here, the torso with the boobies and the stuff like that, and the crows, and look him out. This one here against the
Oh,
wall.
this one,
Yeah, I was looking at that
that
one.
actually, that's me with my heart surgery.
That's you?
Yeah, that's a surgery of ants. That was done by a famous painter after I had a quadruple bypass.
Art? What?
Yeah, so
Oh,
and I
wow.
have a giant scar going down. And
Okay.
he says, "What does that scar feel like?" I go, "It feels like ants are biting me." And so he did that. And so yeah, so that's not a woman, but I can see how you can see those are breasts,
Yeah, there's a
but
breast.
they're not women's
They're not
breasts.
women breast.
Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
so yeah, so that's what's going on there.
Got you. Why the crows?
The crows is I wrote a series of poems when I was in intensive care, and one of the things that was when you're under so much pain and drugs that trying to be conscious and trying to think clearly was such a struggle.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me that was kind of that's kind of an interesting thing is like some people maybe for medication or self-medication, the losing of consciousness or clarity to me was like, oh my God, the most important thing was trying to just keep a conscious awareness and alert, a reflectiveness under such pain and under such um, distress. And the way I kept it was thinking about birds, thinking about the birds outside the window, trying to focus on that, thinking about, how birds migrate, so I would just focus on they became a kind of way to think about how to focus on something. Because if I thought about my body or I thought about the surgeries, I had a respirator, had my lungs were collapsed, my chest was cut open, my bone was sawed. My chest bone was sawed in half.
Mm.
My ribs were cracked open. So I felt like I was beat up and dragged by a car.
Mhm.
The doctor said that the surgery I went through was only second to a burnt trauma, to burnt people who have had severe burns to the level of trauma.
Mhm.
And so you just feel totally, and so the only thing that was working was my ears, and I could hear the birds, and I would just try to focus on that. And so, or see them, so so it had to do with that. So, and I wrote a whole series of poems about that kind of, and I also
Wow.
lost a little bit of language. I couldn't speak. Um, Not that I couldn't speak, but so I would be, if you as I would go, that, and I would whistle like, that thing is called. I would whistle like I didn't know the word. I would whistle something,
Mhm.
and I started thinking, wow. And so I started writing about, and so I think, I'm becoming more bored like, but I just started thinking about how things, I was losing certain abilities. I could depend on everybody to help me out of a bed, to move. And so, you know, c- the one thing I could control is my mind. And so
Yeah.
that became super important, and listening and kind of focusing and tuning in. That was a way to try to deal with all the stuff.
Yeah. I definitely learned like in hospital situations and hospice situations and nursing home, nursing facility situations, it's mindset that really
Yeah,
can make or break you. And
totally. Yeah.
I've seen people just, and I understand it because like it feels like your body has betrayed you, and so like you start to go down like this dark spiral, or you can, and so like the best way is to like stay figure out ways to put yourself in that right mindset. And I guess that can exist outside of the hospital too as well.
Yeah, no,
Um,
and I was, um, when I was going through intensive care, it was during COVID. And so
okay, so this is all recent. This is not that long ago.
no, this is pretty recent. It was and so, the stories I could tell you about the nurses. So they had faced their first wave of COVID death, and a couple of my nurses, uh, because I was in intensive care, they would come. I could see one was crying the whole time. She would break down and start crying. She would cry in the parking lot. She would tell me, I mean, the nurses had gone through so much trauma for the amount of work they were doing, the length that they were doing it, and the number of deaths they saw, and the abuse they were getting. Even when I was in intensive care, people were yelling at them, "I can't be dying of COVID. This is not true. You're not telling me the truth. I can't be dying of COVID." And so I would hear them, yelling at them. And so I saw how the nurses were, um, in trauma, and that, by talking to them, like one nurse said uh, that she was so burdened by being the last person who heard the last words, because she had to translate to the loved ones the last things that that person said, because no one, they were, everybody was isolated.
Yeah.
And so she was the bearer of the last words people said, and she had that responsibility of hearing their last whispered words. And I said, wow, these people. And so all these people had these stories where one guy was going to get married, and he couldn't because he had to be in isolation. So his marriage was postponed. And so I was just thinking, wow. And so so when I started talking to them about birds, like I would say, hey, here's the local birds that I know. I know about 70 birds. And I saw this bird the other day. And, this bird is popular. And we started conversations outside of our hurt. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And say, well, I didn't know about that. Or I know real-tailed hawks. And I would say, hey, how many birds can you list? And there's a dove, this, that. And I say, well, how about this one? About this one? And so that was a way to kind of keep a conversation amongst ourselves in the intensive, that was kind of about beautiful things, right? And so it was a way for me to communicate, because like it was a way for me not to talk about the hurt I was in, like you were saying,
Mm-hmm.
this position. It's like I look forward to saying, well, what bird are you going to talk about today?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to talk about the XYZ or whatever, and the Jay, or the crow. And so so that's kind of the things we would do, and so that's what I was a way to kind of retain my sanity.
Gotcha. And we're so glad to still have you here with us, Juan. Thank you.
I'm glad to be here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like these experiences like that definitely make us have a stronger sense of faith, or that there's something else beyond us. In my opinion, this is my opinion.
Mm.
Um,
It,
the were you gonna say something? I was gonna
oh
mention about
yeah,
this
no,
thing.
I was gonna say the circumstances in the way I got put into the hospital and how I was detected were almost miracle like because there was no beds available. By accident, they discovered, not accident, by a fluke, they discovered I had 4 clogged arteries, and she sent a CD to her doctor. They couldn't get me to a hospital because I was still out and about moving. I had to be like having a heart attack for them to take me, admit me. So they couldn't admit me, but my doctor sent a CD to a specialist, uh, not directly to that specialist, but her supervisor doctor was at this hospital. He puts it on and looks at it. Uh, The specialist of the hospital and main doctor of that hospital, Dr. Ali, walks by and say, "How's that guy still alive? Like that guy should be dead." And he says, "Well, he's a patient right now." And he says, "So and so," and he said, "But we can't find a bed for him." And so out of the fluke, he says, "You know what? If you do these 5 things, we'll get him in." And so they had all these maneuvering things that got me in because back then you couldn't get into the ICU.
Hmm.
So I'm thinking how I got into the ICU is like a miracle. Do you follow me? And to this day, I get really upset with people who don't believe in science.
Hmm.
Like it saved my life, man.
Hmm.
And so people who don't believe in vaccination and all this, and they're still in the hospital bed denying, and as they die, you know, they might wear glasses, they might be diabetic. They have to believe in science in some level,
Yeah,
or
some form.
yeah, in some form,
The
right?
walls holding up the hospital.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. The technology, the phone, everything. They believe in science,
yeah,
but not when it comes to like this other stuff.
yeah.
And I'm thinking I have no tolerance because I literally saw and knew of people who died, and I could have in that been in a situation. I knew people who were denied medical assistance from people who denied the science,
Yeah,
but were taking hospital beds
there it is.
and taking the medicine that other people, do you follow me? They
Could
were
have
denied.
benefited from.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
so I just and they were belligerent and mean to the people who were taking care of us. And I'm
yeah.
thinking, no tolerance.
Got you. Hurt people want to hurt people, as they say.
Yeah.
And the reason why I mentioned this torso picture was because I remember seeing a picture of you and Tom's torso.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I was
That's the
like,
surgery I have. Yeah.
and I was like, you would assume, because I think Tom's like all tatted up,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You would think that Juan would have all the tattoos, but it's vice versa.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's why I thought about this, and I was thinking about that. And so I got one more question for you, and it's one of our
And I
big
bet you
ones.
that portraits of us, when I came out of the surgery, we have these giant scars. And there was a young gal. I was at a party and I was afraid to go in the pool because I sometimes scare the kids, or the kids say, things, and they look, "Whoa, that's gross," or they get scared. And there was a young lady who came up to me. She was maybe 25, 26. She goes, "You had heart surgery?" And I go, "Yeah." And she kind of goes like this and goes, "I had it when I was 16. And I go, "I'm so glad
Mm,
that you're showing your chest." Says there's so many people. And I said, what? It came with the idea. It's to see what the truth of our chest shows, to show our vulnerability and show that weakness that we have. And I think, we talked about this earlier. I think when you move towards people who are different, you realize all of us are vulnerable and all of us need each other.
actually, and you're representing another form of representation
Right.
again.
Yeah. And so I went through therapy, and I went through um little workshops, and a lot of the women who had the surgery I had, they had it harder because of how so much people place on the beauty of a human chest,
Hmm.
right? And so they thought, "Oh man, their lives are scarred," And so I thought, you know what? And one of the photos is a woman who transformed to a man, and she has her breast, surgery off. And so she wanted to show that too. So I wanted to have an art piece of where people are showing tattoos, their vulnerability, their age, their gender, shifting or transition. So the truth of our chests.
Yeah, I love that. Juan, I want to thank you so much for being on The Empire. Can you please let everybody know, or actually, we're going to get to that part. Juan, let's say 100 years pass by, 200 years pass by, half a millennia passes by. So, yeah, Juan, how would you like your empire to look like half a millennia from now regarding education, community work, family? What would you like your empire to look like?
I would like that it still has the natural beauty of the mountains, the desert, that it still retains that natural beauty. I would like there would be much more equitable distribution of income and that there'd be more affordable housing and that every high school and junior high and elementary had access to great databases and libraries and a lot of art and a lot of activities that children can learn from and play. Um, so I just hope that it just magnifies our uniqueness, but there's more resources that come to it that help people have a better quality of life. It's a beautiful, beautiful area, and it just needs the kind of care, and people. And I see it. I see it in the younger generation that they really care about where they live, and I hope there's more people who have a political stance of loving where they live.
Okay,
If you love where you live, you're gonna fight for it.
got you. And that's what you like your empire to look like.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I want people to not think, "Oh, I just need to go be an artist in New York or LA." I wish they wanna be someone in San Bernardino and the IE, and I just hope they love it and they commit to it.
Got you. Wherever they're from.
Right.
Gotcha. Juan, I want to thank you so much for being on The Empire. Can you please let everybody know how they can find you, support your work, collaborate with you? Can you please let everybody know how they can do that?
They can just Google Juan Delgado, poet, and a bunch of poetry comes up, and they have emails. You can just get a hold of me by Juan Delgado, period, poet at Gmail. I have a website, but I haven't gone to the website in a long time. But I think just through email would be the best way.
Got you. No social media?
No, I'm kind of behind the curve on that.
Got you. He's gonna have to get into social media. We're gonna get him one. We're gonna get him one.
After this show, Antonio, I'll get my working on my website in other areas.
Got you.
I do have social media, Instagram, and those other things, but I only use that for seeing my grandkids.
Okay, awesome. Well, we'll put those links in the description, and maybe we'll start to connect Juan around the world with the social media stuff. And I want to thank Juan. I want to thank all you guys. We learned so much about Juan from growing up, teaching, helping the community. You know, the backstory of. I was just thinking about how he was saying about his parents were scared about him going to school because what they experienced, and how he even experienced technology from several different years, from a typewriter to AI. And we just learned so much. And so I just want to thank him. I want to thank all you guys. If you haven't already, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, comment down below what you thought. If you want to support us, you can do our Cash App, $THEE Empire podcast, or anything like that will be in the description. My name is Antonio D. Miles. And other than that, we will catch you guys in the next episode. All right. So take care.
And thank you, Antonio.
No problem, sir. Peace.